see, as Chris mentioned, and the original intent was to do one large reuse study, and due to some funding issues, we were able to kind of have to break that up into two different phases. So what we're here to talk about tonight is phase one, which is really a demographic analysis, and then some conceptual planning there. But the second two-thirds, would be a full retail market analysis, a residential market analysis, some pro forma development, and then a formal urban design plan. But we're going to talk about a few things tonight: is the demographic analysis and the conceptual plan and visioning for that site. So I'll jump right in. What did we find? We found some interesting things with the Wausau, with the city of Wausau and the Wausau region. Your daytime population, obviously, as many of you guys know, it swells about 116%. It's a regional draw. People come in from other places. Most cities in Wisconsin don't always have this. Obviously, you'll see this in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee and some other larger cities. You certainly meet that. We're seeing some modest net growth for your region over the next 5 years. What's really interesting, though, is where that growth is coming from. So your growth is going to be coming from seniors in that 65 to 84-year-old category within a 20-minute drive time. And we did all of our data looking through a 20, 30, and 60-minute drive time circles. So for the 20-minute drive time, your senior group is going to increase 2,300, expanding that drive time out to 30 minutes. 3,300, and then you're looking at 60 minutes, about 9,300. So it's a modest increase overall, but it's a big jump in that particular age group. The really interesting part is the net decrease in working age adults. So people who are 20 to 64, you're going to see a net loss of 944 within that 20 minutes, almost 1,600 in that 30 minutes, and then 6,300 that 60-minute ratio. So that's an interesting dynamic. And you do have some growth in the teenager, in the folks, I believe it's the 12 to 18 market, 12 to 17 market. So you're seeing, some of those numbers rise, but the actual working age folks, that number is decreasing. It's forecasted to decrease over the next 5 years. The largest gains, even within those brackets, so I talked about the overall decrease in the working age, but you are seeing some increases even within that kind of sub-bracket. You're seeing the biggest gains in 35 to 44-year-olds. And then your household income growth is very strong. Typically, you see for about a 5-year period between 5 to 6, maybe 7%. For your drive time, that 20-minute drive time, it's going to be up 15%. In the 30-minute drive time, it's going to be up 14%. And even within the 60-minute drive time, it's going to be up 9%. So your growth is above what essentially the average would be for the greater Wisconsin and within the rest of the Midwest. So that's very positive signs as we look at market forecasts. Now, some of the other things that we found was we were actually quite surprised at your rent rates. The rent rates here in Wausau are incredibly affordable. When you hear about the affordable housing issues that are going on out west and some of the other major metros, you're talking about, affordability typically is viewed as about 30% of your annual income should be going towards housing. In Wausau's case, on average, that's around 13%, a little less than 13% that's going towards housing, which is great from the affordability standpoint, from a quality of life standpoint. What makes it difficult is for development to be able to do that type of rental development, because those aren't just typical rent rates that you see normally that would support construction. Now, the average square foot, this is an important number, $1.49 on average square foot for non-restricted. And what I mean by non-restricted is non-affordable housing subsidized, so not rent-restricted rates, which isn't a bad number. It's actually a pretty good number. Typically, when you see larger cities, the target's about $2 a square foot, what you want to see. But even being about that $1.50 range, you're okay. The really interesting part was the lack of high-end units. And by high-end units, it's high-end units for the market. As we looked at the average rental availability in the Wausau area, there was quite a bit in that, call it $500 to $750 a month area. You had very few units that were above that. And by above that, these $975 to $1,750 a month units are typically, they fall still within that affordability range. So they're still looking at about 30% of annual income for, a typical household, for the average household in Wausau. So even the high-end stuff is affordable in Wausau, which is good, again, from a quality of life standpoint. But this, by the way, this particular development is the last published rent rates of Riverview, which I know has reached a couple of speed bumps along the way there in Wausau. So this isn't even necessarily a market that's in play yet. So even though those were the advertised rates, that's not even a product and a rent rate that's seen in the market yet. That was the one that was projected to come in. The other interesting thing too is with that particular site is that the walk score, if you're not familiar with walk score, it's a, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. It is a place-based rating system that was constructed by the University of Michigan to help quantify the walkability of a place, how close you are to other amenities, with 100 being a perfect score. So the walk score of the Riverview site, as an example, has a score of 61. So that's an interesting. Normally, you look at some of the other rentals in the downtown area, and they score in the 70s and 80s. So that's a little low for that particular development. But for the development that we're looking at, that's been more in the 75 to 80 range. So other things that we found, the home ownership is very strong in Wausau. And what we're seeing, according to some of the census information and the forecasts that are going from 2017 to 2022, is we're seeing a strong increase in the need for higher end housing. Typically, you see natural increase in property values based on the living conditions of the community. Typically, property naturally increases in value. In Wausau's case, these are going to go up more than just the 5 to 7% that you'd normally expect. Probably it's going to go along with the rate of people being able to, we talk about the household income going up 15%. That's going to follow the same thing. So what that's going to do is that's going to increase demand for owner-occupied units. So those could be condos, those could be single-family houses, whatever the format looks like. But that's going to dramatically increase what that's going to be for that 20, 30, and 60-minute drive times. Conversely, what that does is that decreases the desire for lower-end housing. So it's something to be aware of as you look at your community development efforts going forward. But for the purposes of this particular site, we're looking at really the biggest bumps being in that 3 to 399, so between 300 to 400,000, and even above that, there being some significant demand for higher-end housing. So obviously, not all that would be considered downtown condo. People also want single-family, but it certainly does spell good things to the ability for potential for condos. So here's just a visual chart that we'll talk more about. That talks more about gives you a visualization of some of what the net change looks like by housing value. On a retail standpoint, what we found is that there is not just a large, I think that's a little bit to understand, there's a huge retail gap between the amount of supply and the amount of demand in the area. And what that means is that there is way more supply of retail in the area than there is demand for it. So that means one of two things, and probably a combination thereof. So the first thing it means is that you draw in retail, people could come and shop, obviously, from much farther than what a normal community would. And then two, that there's also the possibility that you have overbuilt retail, which you have too much retail necessarily for the area. So from a national retail chain standpoint, they would look at these numbers and not really want to have a lot to do with a market like this. But the good news is for this type of development, and what we've talked about with the community is that there's more of a desire to have locally owned businesses, and locally owned businesses can be much more nimble and fit within the niche a little bit better than the national retail chain. So they have a tendency to have a better handle on the market. So we'll explore more of that potentially in phase 2. The biggest positive gaps that we saw in the market was the opportunity for restaurants and other eating places, for beer, wine, and liquor stores, for other miscellaneous store retailers, for jewelry, luggage, and leather goods, and then used merchandise stores. Now, when you see these categories, I imagine the first thing people think of is the worst of each of these categories, especially the beer, wine, and liquor stores, as well as used merchandise. But you can, tap into that market by having, wine shops. You can have upscale retail, for reused resale that we've seen in a lot of communities where they do, they call it upcycling for used merchandise. So you can do it in a way that's not necessarily a discount way, but it's still meeting some of those needs. So what does all this mean? I threw a lot of numbers at you, and I know I went rather quickly. I want to try to make the most of our time here tonight. But for the demographics speaking, that from the tapestry, the analytics that we've taken a look at, and what we've seen in some of the forecasting numbers, that senior targeted may be a really good route, especially if we're looking at the potential for owner-occupied, so condos, especially when we're looking at the number of seniors, and there's the potential for, they call them medical condos, which would be kind of an organized senior living, but within, with in-house doctors, that type of thing might be a good opportunity. And then looking at young professionals within the area, there's an unmet network there. And then we're looking at the low residential rates. I think, again, that's going to make rental development a little more difficult. And there's not much in urban format, but I want to tell you that that's not the end of the world. Because the product type's not available, there's no comps. So in residential, typically you think of comparables. There isn't really a comparable to an urban format that's going to be 1,200 square feet that's targeting young professionals. There's apartments in downtown Wausau, but there's nothing that meets that demand yet. And we've seen that happen in Detroit, Milwaukee, and other larger cities as they start to bring on downtown housing. But it's something that's not here yet. And so I wouldn't look at those rent rates as necessarily being a huge stumbling block, just something that we need to be aware of, and that's something that we'll have to educate the market a little bit going forward, that a developer will need to do that too as they look at those rent rates. The other part, the increase in the housing demand in values, that really does suggest condos. I mentioned that earlier. Retail really should be niche retail. And then I think as we look at the size of this site, and I know Mark's going to talk about this here in just a few minutes, when we look about the size of the site, we're going to need to probably look at things other than just solely retail and solely housing. I think that there can be a good mix of things as we look at this stuff, but there are certainly people have brought up in our in some of the focus groups and the stakeholder meetings that we've had, the ideas about hotels. There's ideas around other possible venues, office space. Those things I think are all still very much need to be on the table, because I don't think that there's enough demand here from a retail standpoint and a housing standpoint for the entire 8 blocks to be retail and housing within a 10-year time frame. But we'll talk more about that here in just a minute. I want to ask, before we move on, what questions you have on this.
Committee? It looks like no questions at this point.
All right, either I did a really good job or a really bad job, and there's just nowhere to start. So one of the two. Mark, I'm going to turn this over to you. I'm going to switch over to your laptop.
Okay.
And
okay.
There we go.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Good evening or good afternoon. I guess it's evening here and afternoon there. So I'll say both. We're just, Dorian and I are just going to go through some of our initial exploration in terms of the urban design approach, and a couple of different options that we've been analyzing and looking at as far as how the overall site can be reused, the way that we think that it can be broken down and potentially integrated into the existing downtown and the context that surrounds it, knowing that we're quite sensitive to that aspect of the potential redevelopment, and we think quite highly of the downtown, traditional downtown aspects of Wausau, and that there are a lot of very good, what we often call good bones in the city, and the mall is a bit of an anomaly to that. So our approach in looking at this is how we can create more of the traditional downtown and allow the quality of the downtown to sort of expand, if you will, to the south across Washington down to 4th Street, and allow that downtown to grow. And ultimately, there's potentially multiple blocks that can happen in that regard. And we see that as being a growth potential, not in an immediate manner. I think going back to Joe's point about where the market is and how it will grow over time. We also see the development of the site to be an opportunity to do something in the near term, but also to see it grow over time. So what we're proposing here is to show how it would be in a later form, not in the initial form. So keep that in mind as we show what would be considered to be possibly a 5, 10, or even 15-year build out, depending on the market condition as we go along. So with that, I'll go through some of our process images and then give you some idea of where we're at. And keep in mind also, lastly, that what we have at this time is not in any way a final design, and what we have is we're studying the general breakdown of the site and how it can be articulated. We're looking at mixed use massing of the blocks, the size of the blocks in the downtown, the potential for buildings to be on those blocks. But at this point, we are not designing the buildings or presenting to you sort of a final urban design plan. So this is a progress, a point in the path. And ultimately, we would have an urban design plan and urban design images that would be more refined in terms of showing essentially renderings of what it would look like. And what you're seeing tonight are progress points. And it's a bit more like massing and orientation in terms of the way we see the site developing. So keep that in mind as well, please. So obviously the site, we're all familiar with it. It's clear the mall is very different than the traditional downtown, as I stated, and we take that very seriously in terms of analyzing the existing downtown and see how it evolves into the mall site. We developed a 3-dimensional model so that we could study this in 2 dimensions as well as 3D, so we understand the heights and the massing of the blocks and how the streets carry over from area to area, including the public space, the green space, and the landscape. So this is just our model, and this is the model of existing conditions only, so you could get a sense of the massing. Of course, it's like an aerial, but it's a bit more dumbed down as well, in terms of just simply the boxes, so we can get more of a sense of the massing of the building and not so much the articulation and the materials that are there. Also, part of our process is in analyzing the context that we're dealing with in a place. So, and the way we look at this is we look at it in a manner where we're essentially analyzing the particular conditions of the context, so we understand what influences the site and what kinds of uses and physical conditions influence the site, so that as to think about the site in a way that it appropriately connects to what's there. So in this case, in all the cases you'll see, is the dotted sort of red line is the site itself, and the site is north, just like the aerial view that I showed prior. And in red, you see these are I'm show just a series of images, and I just want to show you the process and the thinking that we have, so I won't dwell on much of these. I just want to explain what it is that we've done as far as what influences and informs our design ideas and our direction and thinking about redevelopment. So we're studying here in red the mixed use properties that are office and retail, and then as we go forward, I think we go forward. It's not going forward. All right, there we go. Sorry. The mixed use, this is a commercial, what we have in terms of commercial. So everything in red there is, for the most part, commercial uses on the property and how it influences the area. Also industrial properties surrounding the site, how far they are away, what's adjacent, what's nearby to the south, to the east, to the north. Institutional activities, and that includes public space, and what would be considered to be civic or city land or city or government. So there's plenty of that in the city, as well as other mixed use where office and residential are part of the mix, the different type of mix, and also where there's non-institutional office properties and land uses in that regard. So there are a variety of different uses. Again, this is a mixed-use district overall, and these images illustrate that. And as well, we also identify the public spaces, the parks, the green spaces, so that we understand where there's a significant amount or where there's some lacking, and how we might think about public space or park conditions, public squares, civic spaces within the development area as it would connect to the others that exist in the surrounding context. And these are all examples of the public space. And then general residential uses of different sorts. Now, the colors in dark and light show that a higher density or lower density being more single family, higher density with more sort of apartment building or something of a higher density. But as you can see, there's a lot of residential in the areas around, primarily to the east, but not so much in the center for the most part, at least that's solidly residential and not a mix. And then we have some mix of residential and retail, mostly to the north, and again, not so much around the site, but a little bit further away from the site, a few blocks away. And with that, Dorian will talk a little bit about the walkability and some of the issues where Joe talked about walk score, and this ties into that as the concept of how walkable or how pedestrian-oriented this site is.
Okay, thanks, Mark. The one thing that we always look at in all of our projects is the walkability, and we do that by analyzing the site area in terms of what's called a pedestrian shed, and it's basically a 5-minute walking radius from what we would consider to be, in this case, the center of the downtown area. And as we can see with this diagram, the area that the mall inhabits falls within that quarter-mile walking radius. So it's a good candidate for a mix of uses, including residential, as a way to feed more pedestrian activity throughout the entire core. The other thing that I think is evident in the image is the scale of the mass of the mall in relationship to the block structure of the traditional downtown. And that's something that, from a walkability standpoint, we like to promote the kinds of smaller block structure that you have within your traditional core as a way of promoting redevelopment. And so that's part of what you see with sort of the red dotted and dashed lines there, where we're starting to look at the potential of creating a smaller walkable block structure on the footprint of the existing mall, and starting to think of ways that we can integrate it into the urban downtown fabric that you have there by creating smaller development parcels. So conceptually, what we're doing, as is shown here, is creating, which you can see in the sort of lighter pink or lavender type color on the left side of the image, is the extrusion of the site and the breaking of the site of the mall into development parcels that would be in keeping with the blocks that are adjacent in the traditional downtown core. So you can see once we start pulling the existing street patterns through the site, we start to get developable parcels that are similar in scale to what you have in the downtown. And part of the reason why that's important from the beginning standpoint is that it gives people something that they can identify with and something that they can understand as a developable unit. And it breaks down this thing so that no one person thinks they need to develop the entire mall site in order for it to be successful. The other thing that we're showing in this conceptual diagram is that because the mall is going to be at the edge of our walkability radius, there may be the need or desire to include more public space or green space within the redevelopment of the mall site, just from a walkability standpoint. And you'll see that as we move forward in the development of the concepts.
The other thing that we look at is the site as it relates to entering the site or gateways and what we consider to be sort of, how people come to the site either from a pedestrian standpoint or in other modes. Obviously, plenty of people come to the site by way of car activity. So in this sketch, we're sort of identifying where the primary pedestrian access is, which is the red dot sort of in the center, and that right at the 3rd and Washington, as sort of the primary, at least currently, the primary way that people enter the site. And then the other larger circles are the sort of nodal points of where people enter the site by way of the automobile. But this gives us a bit of a sense of how the existing conditions are utilized. And obviously, with the grid that's there to the north, there are plenty of opportunities to access the site in other ways, which we've explored and looked at. Dorian, you want to go into these are A and B together?
Yeah, and so we started to look at, as I mentioned before, breaking down the scale of this site and creating redevelopment parcels. And so what you're seeing here, as they're labeled, I'll start at the bottom in the red color. Those are existing parcels for reuse, which would be the Yonkers building and the parking deck. And so in Scheme A, we look at retaining those elements. Then to the west, you can see it's labeled as new and existing redevelopment because there's the opportunity to reuse part of that site, essentially the parking level that's there, but to also redevelop the upper level of the site. So it's new and existing redevelopment. And then on the northern side of the site, we've got 3 redevelopment parcels that, as I talked about before, are broken down so that they are within the same sort of scale that you find in the traditional downtown. On the second scheme, we look at the more long-term development option of the site, where we still have the 3 main redevelopment parcels on the north. We keep the existing parking deck. We keep the new and existing redevelopment, the old JCPenney site and deck. But then to the south, we continue the street through to connect to the industrial lands to the south, and we create 2 new redevelopment parcels. One the size of the traditional block, and then one which basically acts as a liner or a building that would wrap the existing parking garage and be used for completing the urban fabric that you'll see in some of the sketches coming forward. But it's a way to have parcels that the size doesn't scare people off, and also a size that can be done in an incremental manner over time. So you don't have to do everything at once. They're large enough that they can, or small enough that they can get financing, but large enough that they'll have an impact as they're developed.
In each of these blocks, these are 2 separate schemes or things that we've explored about how to break down the site. And each of the blocks could have potentially, and I'll show you in a minute, multiple projects on each block. So the block pattern is broken down in a manner that's congruent with the traditional block pattern in the city to the north, and so it continues on. But as with the north buildings, the buildings in the traditional downtown, there are multiple buildings on each block, and similarly, we anticipate that these blocks could be developed in a similar manner, where there could be multiple projects per block depending on the size and scale that a development or a developer would be interested in pursuing. So they're not super blocks in a sense. They don't have to be all done at one time. And that goes to the idea of phasing and building this over time to address the market conditions, so that there can be an initial critical mass of a certain amount of development, but it doesn't all have to be done at one time, that it can be incrementally developed. And one of the advantages of the existing site is that you have 2 parking decks directly on site already built. So much of the parking that may be required for the development is already in place and wouldn't have to be built, which is a huge asset for the redevelopment opportunities in the site. So these are both conceptual breakdowns of the site, and now we'll go through it with a little bit more detail about the exploration of Concept A and Concept B with 3D massing and some more detail about walkability and linkages and connectivity. First, I just wanted to point out that within these schemes, both A and B, that we're proposing the development of essentially new streets that would create the boundaries of these new blocks that would be created. And of course, those streets have to take on a certain configuration. So based on the existing streets that are in the city and the widths of the streets and the right-of-way from building wall to building wall and sidewalks and parking and tree landscape and such, we looked at and started to study some block or some street patterns that could potentially be implemented in these new streets. So they take on a couple different forms. Some are with parallel parking, potentially angled parking, with a little bit more green space or less green space, wider sidewalks, possibly with more commercial orientation where there might be outdoor cafes or a little bit higher density, and less sidewalks and more green for areas that might be a bit more residentially oriented. So these are some of the studies that we did that would be very similar to the traditional downtown condition in the streetscape that you have. So I want to just walk through briefly some of the particulars of our initial ideas for implementing Concept A and Concept B. So here's the 3D model of Concept A, and you can see where the site is. We've broken down the property as Dorian described in the Concept A and Concept B, sort of in a broad way. Now this in a broad way, not Broadway. And this is now a bit more articulated with showing building blocks that would actually be individual buildings on the site, and how the public space and potentially parking access and such can happen on the site. So here's an aerial view of that and some 3-dimensional views of how that works in terms of the massing of the existing downtown and the scale, which is typically, for the most part, 2 to 4 stories, although there are a few buildings that are a bit more than that. But for the most part, 2 to 4 story downtown. So the general orientation of the buildings that we've shown in Scheme A are in that general 3 to 4 story area, and of course that would be dictated on the type of building that would be done, the type of uses that would be proposed, and of course what the market would support based on the development of the market study that Joe would do in Phase 2. And you can see in the model, you can see that in this Scheme A, the existing parking deck for on the far side, which would be the east side, is intact as it is, although, as Dorian mentioned, would potentially have a liner building along the edge, which would help to mask the parking deck and allow for a more appropriate street activity. And then the Yonkers building, in this case, is kept intact as well, with a potential reuse or possibly a new tenant. So in this scheme, we keep that building in place. And as well, the majority of the JCPenney deck that's fully in place as well. But in this scheme, we're conceptualizing that on top of that deck, we would build largely a series of housing buildings, potentially loft buildings or townhouse type buildings that can go in a number of different directions. But this is what we're showing, and I'll speak about the land use in a minute. So these are just a variety of images that show that 3D massing. And again, you can see the block pattern that's been broken down, similar to the traditional downtown block pattern, and the scale of the buildings and the articulation of the buildings done in a similar way to the block patterns that are in the existing traditional downtown. And again, incremental buildings that can be done in phases. So a few of the buildings can be done and then they can grow. And so again, these are not meant to be designs; they're blocks, and the fenestration is simply to show building height and how it's in this sense 3 stories, and to give a little bit of a sense of scale. But we're not intending it to look like the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. For those that are aware of Mies van der Rohe, not necessarily the intention. So so you get a sense of the massing and the scale. And again, those buildings that we show can be done in a variety of ways. This is one way of how the blocks can be articulated and how the buildings can be done. There are numerous ways that can happen, and we're just essentially illustrating how this can be implemented. But as you would know, with an actual development, with a developer on board wanting to do maybe an office building with retail, or a residential building with retail, or any other type of building, or an institutional building of some sort, or what have you, it can be articulated in a number of ways. And here's another example of that scheme A, articulated a little differently. Now we're showing a bit more detail in terms of networking, the pedestrian network that can happen, where the sidewalks would be, crosswalks. And these buildings, although in this scheme look a little tall, they're just simply 3-story buildings. It's the nature of the axonometric that's sketched here that looks a little bit vertical, but they would be in the 40 to 50 foot range. And of course, they could be 2 stories, they could be 4 stories. This is just illustrating the kind of density and capacity that could develop on the site. With Scheme B, the primary difference here is a bit more articulation with the building blocks, or the city blocks. Some added green space, public space that's been added, additional sort of civic public space, which would be like small squares, not as big as the one that exists to the north off of 3rd Street, but a bit more sort of localized, that would be assets to the population that would be part of this district, this part of the southern part of the central business district. And the other big change here is the Yonkers building, in this case, is now gone, and we've added the street that cuts through, and now we have an additional block that's separated, and the parking deck to the east is lined with another building to its west, as well as a liner to the north. And again, some more 3-dimensional images similar to the Scheme A, but the building blocks are a bit varied. The buildings would be a bit varied. You could see the green spaces showing the public spaces that are there, and also the additional block added where Yonkers is, and street added where Yonkers is gone. And now that's broken in. So we have essentially what would be effectively 8 new blocks to build on, although the parking deck takes up sort of 1.5. So it's really 6 blocks and an articulated sort of parking deck, which is 2 blocks integrated into one. So which equates to a liner. So you can see that there are multiple buildings and many ways that this can be articulated and developed. With housing, office, retail, a variety of different uses, including public realm and public space, and I'll show that further in a minute. So these are all images of the concept B, showing an inner court for public space, an outdoor public space for green space, and then you see there's sort of gaps between the buildings. Those would be pedestrian links or passageways that allow for a sort of a secondary network from block to block, from the parking to the uses of the buildings, from the street to the street, and to the public space and the activity in the center of the buildings as well. And I have a sketch that shows that a little bit more in detail, that network. So these are, again, just the images of that. Okay, Dorian, you want to speak to this for a minute?
And so one of the things that Mark had mentioned was this idea of the network. And one of the things that we noticed in those initial drawings that Mark showed at the very beginning, one of them had an area in it that, or one of them analyzed the green space network. And so what we noticed was that there needed to be more green space added down in the area to the south. And so we incorporated it as part of the development scheme. And so what you're seeing here is the main public space and linkages between that main public space going down 3rd Street to the new development area to tie it together.
Okay. And then this is a land use plan, a ground floor land use plan that shows that concept B with a little bit more detail in terms of how the pedestrian network starts to work its way through the blocks, where the green space can be integrated with the different uses, and how the blocks can be. And again, I stress the fact that this is just a conceptual scheme. This isn't saying that this is the right answer. This is saying that this is a way that the building, the blocks of the overall site breakdown into the 8 blocks that we have can be articulated. So what we're showing is 3rd Street as it comes down to the south enters into the new southern part, the south of Washington district here, and is still sort of a continuation of a main street. And Washington, at that intersection of 3rd and Washington, is also sort of a main or a primary main street as well. And some of the street front buildings to the north side of Washington actually face the mall currently, and there's nothing at the mall edge that sort of faces it back. So it's sort of a one-sided view. And in our scheme, we see Washington as kind of a retail commercial street, at least for the first 2 blocks away from 3rd Street, and starts to break down as it goes away, possibly into something a little bit more residentially oriented or institutionally oriented. And as you go south on 3rd Street, the main street, if you will, of 3rd continues down a block and a half or 2 down. So everything in red you see there is more oriented toward what would be commercial use in terms of largely retail, possibly restaurant, cafe, lounge, and possibly in some of the peripheral areas, service retail, maybe possibly some office and yoga studio, supplemental service studio, not traditional retail necessarily. But we see pedestrian activity being oriented around 3rd and Washington, east and west off of 3rd on Washington, down 3rd to the south, and then around all the way down to what would be Forest. And we anticipate that Forest would ultimately be redeveloped into something that's a bit more pedestrian oriented over time. Currently it is not a one-way street that's largely a very busy street one way. We anticipate that could likely and will likely become something else. So that could be very easily a pedestrian oriented connection at that point. And then the green space becomes one of the public spaces in the area. And then on each side to the east and west, we see those areas as being largely residentially oriented townhouses, row houses, potentially loft buildings, possibly senior housing, these kinds of things on each end of the site, which would feed the retail in the center as well. And the retail, again, this is first floor sort of ground level. We anticipate what you see in red could have above it residential and or office space above. So this isn't that we anticipate all that being retail only or commercial only on the ground floor. We anticipate those being multi-story buildings that would have activities on the upper floors as well. So this is all mixed use as we show in the 3D model, but this is just an illustration of how we anticipate or see how the first floor could possibly be broken down. And keep in mind, the scale and the breakdown of sizes are in keeping with the traditional downtown to the north which we feel has been pretty successful in terms of its articulation and the size of the spaces that are there. Now, we mentioned a couple of...
Mark, I want to reiterate real quick to get back to that last slide.
Yep.
That retail, again, the idea of
Yep.
incremental development, that this is not going to all necessarily all come online at once. And so I think the first thing I think people would do when they see this is, first of all, we're not integrating, 240,000 square feet of retail, but we're, doing it in a much more bite-sized manner, and we're doing it in a way that will phase it in, so it won't just all of a sudden flood the market.
Yeah, and just to give you an idea of what that means in terms of reality, each one of these blocks, for example, as we show here, would be somewhere in the area of around 25 to 40 or so thousand square feet of retail. So it's not, we don't anticipate all of this being done at once. We don't anticipate the entire site being retail, but we could see how there could be incremental retail, and many of those retail spaces can be small and broken up in a way where it's very similar to the way the traditional downtown currently works, and how the sizes and scale of much of the retailers that are already there, and in many cases doing well, we anticipate that growing into the south as part of the plan. So we mentioned a number of times the sort of with the pedestrian network and the scale and the sort of public realm that's there. This sketch just gives you an idea of how we see, and again, it's a Plan B articulation, but how we see not just those blocks being broken down into 6 or 8 blocks as we've defined, but how the pedestrian network that comes from the traditional downtown to the north starts to filter in and integrate through each of those blocks. So it's not just the streetscape itself, but each block can be broken down into a sort of a sub level or a secondary network that allows for easy access from the parking deck to many of these buildings, which allows that the parking either on the east or the west of the penny parking, or the parking to the to the east end of the deck can be well integrated into the site, so that wherever you may go, whether it be residential or retail or office, you're within an easy connection pedestrian wise through mid-block crossings, through cutting through blocks, so they're not large-scale super blocks and difficult to walk around. But this is very typical in keeping with a pedestrian-oriented, walkable environment where the distance from place to place is not only limited in length, but is relatively easy to get from point A to point B, and is pleasant from point A to point B as well. So you could see this network being utilized not only by office workers that might be there, or retailers that are there, and people that come to visit in terms of retail and shop and such, but also the people that live in the district above the stores, above the second or third floor of the townhouses, and walk their dogs or go get a coffee or what have you. So you could just anticipate that network being something that becomes just a very important asset to make this a livable place. And lastly, I just wanted to give you a bit more of a reality. These are, when we show these blocks, we're not just sort of drawing blocks on a page to sort of illustrate an IFCOM. We're actually thinking about how these blocks actually work. So each one of these blocks are real scale and can work as what we consider to be appropriate urban buildings. And here's just an example of how we see some of those internal blocks working out in terms of scale, in terms of how you can access it. They're just sort of our sketches to verify in our eyes how those buildings work, how we can make those into residential or office spaces, how we would deal with the circulation, the vertical circulation, elevator, stairs, egress, how would we deal with the ground floor situation, which is retail or commercial, and how big they would be in terms of what scale, how they could be broken down into multiple stores or retailers or users, and how many units, say, we could get on a block in terms of 2 stories, 3 stories, how big those units could be. Are they 700 feet, 900 feet, 1,000 feet? And just to give us a sense of reality in terms of the blocks that we see here we've started to look at how that actually turns into real numbers, and we have ideas on where that could go. And with the support of the second phase of what Joe does in terms of clarifying and solidifying those numbers, we will be able to break down actual counts of square footages and potential residential and office spaces or scenarios that are there, so we really know how many what the capacity, if you will, of this entire development block by block can be, and that would be part of where we're going at this point, going into the next phase. So there we go. Any questions? We're happy to answer, or pull back an image if we need to, or what have you.
Okay, there's a lot to digest there. Anything from the committee? Questions, concerns? Ms. Rasmussen.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. I guess it is inspiring to see some new concepts for that area. And, when we talk about new streets, they're really new old streets, because, anyone who lived in Wausau prior to the construction of the mall knows what the street grid was. And, for over 30 years, the mall was a great economic engine for our downtown. But, the fact that these concepts restore some of that original grid and diversifies the use of some of that property to residential or industrial. I mean, obviously, everything we've seen in the presentation may not come to fruition anytime soon, because obviously there's, logistics and land use and ownership issues and whatnot. But, I feel a little bit of, at least some validation, because if you rewind to 2015, when we first started to talk to CBL about what to do with the mall when they still owned it, at one point in a meeting with those folks, I said, I think we need to demall the mall and, open up that hallway in the middle and let 3rd Street flow back through. And, at that point, for those of us around the table who had that idea, they looked at us like we had two heads. And so the idea that we were not far off the mark when we see the professionals come in and do not only a market analysis but a conceptual analysis really tells us that even back then, those ideas, or at least the nucleus of those ideas, was on the right path. And so, going forward, I think we've got, at least a good starting point here where we can have some real conversations about, what the use of that space potentially could be versus what it is today. So I'm inspired to see that, this design is at least coming forward out of phase 1.
And certainly it lends itself to a phased approach where you might be working with this part of the footprint, in a phase 1, if you will, maintaining, other elements as they are or what have you, and over a period of maybe a long time, you go through an overall, redevelopment of the whole spot. I noticed, and I want to keep this brief. There was a lot of talk about 2, 3, maybe 4-story buildings, and I know this is totally conceptual and preliminary, but I also take into account the sort of vantage point position that part of our town has potentially, with views to the southwest, to Rib Mountain, to the sunset, if you will, and even views back over to the north, over downtown proper, which might lend themselves to a taller, corporate, headquarters type building or that sort of thing. So I don't think we have to keep our minds in that 3-story, limit, of course. So sky's the limit, really. Now, I did not mention at the beginning of this meeting, because the nature of this meeting is so informational and updating and whatnot, I didn't talk about public comment. I will welcome public comment as we go through on items as we're dealing with them on the agenda. Although, since we have some lengthy presentations and discussions to be had here, I would encourage anybody who wants to speak to come forward and give a very brief comment so that we can continue with our business. Is there anybody at this point? Yes, please just come up and give us your name and address, and keep it to maybe 2 or 3 minutes, okay?
I shall try. Judith Miller, 903 Kickbush Street, Wausau. Couple questions for the gentleman from Michigan. First and foremost, this. If we totally demolished the mall, there wasn't a store standing that now exists in it, would that redress the balance that you have spoken of between retail supply and demand in Wausau?
So let me restate your question, make sure I understand it. So if the mall didn't exist at all, Does
Correct.
that balance the retail gap?
Yeah.
No.
And where do
No,
you see that retail gap? What goods or services are we oversupplied in compared to demand?
Typically, again, having to go a little bit more in detail, I would say generally you're looking at I hate to name specific stores, but you're looking at general soft goods, anywhere you buy clothes, you know, those types of places are typically are really, you know, a little bit overbuilt. There's really a fight around the retail, on the national retail side of, you know, it's a combination of those things plus, you know, online retailing. But I would say, you know, you're already looking at, I would say I believe it was 70 million was the total sales estimated from the 3 anchor stores that were there previously. That's already gone. But I mean, there is a potential to recapture some of that. But I think that there's that gap that exists, that 500 million, excuse me, that large gap that exists. I don't have the sheet in front of me. That exists. You know, that is a lot of different factors that go into that. But I would say that, you know, the elimination of that would not completely eliminate that gap. But I still think that you can have healthy retail in that spot, and it's done a little bit differently than I think you would see. You know, essentially they view when you look at the market analysis data, they view a boutique the same way they view a Walmart. And so, you know, there may be room, and we got to get into that, and whether or not for that niche retail, I think there is room for that niche retail. It's not the same market as Walmart. You got to kind of dig a little bit deeper to figure out what the differences are there.
Okay, I understand what you're saying because I too lived in Birmingham, Michigan, and I lived there when they created the square that has recently been remodeled there. I spoke to one of you gentlemen about that, and they had niche boutiques, et cetera, at that time. That was 30, 40 years ago. Now, moving on, my question is, okay, so what kind of retail would Wausau need to attract? That's kind of what I'm digging for, is how do you see that? You have experience of other places, other cities, especially around Detroit, which experienced an incredible economic breakdown and is now rebuilding, as I understand things, with a different sort of downtown and different arenas for people to visit. So what kind of retail would Wausau need to attract?
Well, I do believe. I'm sorry. I want to keep this brief, you know, and I think some of that was discussed earlier in the presentation. Anybody?
I didn't hear it.
Oh, I'm sorry, but anybody interested in, let's say, coming to downtown with a business, a retail business, is going to be concerned about things like duplication with, you know, similar businesses in the area, concerns about leakage from downtown to elsewhere. Traffic patterns and that sort of thing. So, you know, the marketplace kind of determines a lot of that. And some of the information we've received is things, local businesses, you know, something more boutique-y, specialty type operations are going to have a better viability in this kind of setting than, let's say, you know, a small big box or that sort of thing.
This I understand.
Yeah.
That's why I was asking what kind of retail would Wausau need to attract. Yeah, because this has long been my vision of, as Lisa said, demauling the mall for much longer than it's been discussed here. Okay, other question is...
Okay, could we make this your last question, please?
It will be.
Okay.
On average... when you're talking about residences within this 8-block area, how do you see, I wasn't clear about that. How do you see the average price? And I'm asking for an average, I'm not asking even for a range. Do you have a figure in mind?
Typically, in this kind of development, and you see this in towns like Milwaukee, or where that have done maybe a region of town where they've done a major redevelopment, they try to address a mixed market kind of approach to residences. So it's not exclusively low rent, it's not exclusively high rent, you know, that it really side by each could be a very high-priced apartment building with a very medium-priced one. That's very common because it encourages a good diversity of residences. So I'm pretty sure that's what we would be going for, is a mixed bag.
It's hard to envision because the area of the mall is so big, you know. To imagine it not there and carved up like this is a bit difficult, given how long it's been there. Anyway, thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else?
Just
All
a
right,
follow-up
Ms. Rasmussen.
Just a follow-up comment. Thank you. I think that it's also important for us to keep in mind, as we're keeping an open mind for what the mall could be, we shouldn't also make the assumption that every retailer that exists in the mall today, whether they're national or not, is necessarily going away. Because I think a lot of the smaller tenants that exist in the mall today have changed their business models too, where they're operating out of brick and mortar stores that have either parking lot or sidewalk access. And just as an example, when you see the new Maurice's and the CJ Banks, both of which were built in Plover, those are built now with external access. They're not all under one roof. But historically, many of those stores and many of those chains, their business model was all mall driven, and all they knew was malls. And I think that at some point, if mixed-use space starts to evolve, and there's storefront space for a store that has still a high-yield sale volume, whether it's, certain types of retail specialty shops, whatever. There's a number of those that are still in the mall today that their business model has evolved, and they may also find ways that they can accommodate some of this space and, stay in Wausau. The last thing we want to do is to create an environment which, I think that the retail industry kind of drives this. We were at a point in Wausau where we traveled to larger areas to buy most things in the 80s and the early 90s. We got to a point in Wausau which now we're a little overbuilt on retail. You didn't have to do that anymore. Now we're coming back around to the point where, you're going to drive 90 miles if you want to find a Penny's, or you're going to have to drive to find the things that have left if people still want them. But I think we shouldn't assume that all of our national retail is necessarily gone if we were to redesign some of that space.
We are certainly seeing national retailers look at urban formats more. Even Meijer has just opened, they just announced here in Lansing, and then they just opened in Grand Rapids an urban format grocery store too. So we're seeing, the national and regional chains adapt to this environment.
Okay, very good. Anything else from the committee? Mr. Martins.
Yeah, I got just one quick question for the consultants. I really enjoyed the conceptual design you have for the mall. I guess the one question that comes to my mind is if we were to envision this type of project moving forward. You said it's going to be a phased development because, like you said, we couldn't have 240,000 square feet of retail hit the market at all in one time. Would this be something where the mall would be raised and there would be empty space, green space, while the project is sort of re-envisioned, rebuilt, and mixed use is kind of brought online in sort of a staggered format? Or is there something where the mall kind of, the existing structure kind of coexists and it's sort of eaten away piecemeal as its new, it's sort of a new genesis comes about?
So I can answer that just real quick. I think, as Lisa said, it's it little bit depends on the ownership structure and what the mall owner or future owners would be willing to undertake and how they see that fitting together while trying to accommodate existing retailers. But one, just on the screen now under the concept B, for example, we own Sears, for example, which is essentially that first block of the 3 blocks, because the Sears connection is right there at what the extension of 4th Street would be. And so then you do have, kind of the opportunity to have, a dialogue to say, well, perhaps the first block is Sears because we do have control of it, depending on what happens with Yonkers and how that's, how long or what use that comes in, depending on what users are attracted or want Pennies, then that could happen, and so I think that'll be the, kind of approach, be as pragmatic as possible in, kind of looking at it. And of course, if there was an owner that wanted to do a big redevelopment, that's another thing. But I think we, we don't necessarily expect that to happen like that. So I think this plan is, is more realistic about its phased approach.
Mm-hmm. for that matter. I mean, the megalithic structure itself could stay for a long time, but be reused in a lot of different ways. So,
Sure.
okay. Can we move on to our next agenda item, everybody? Good. All right. Welcome, folks, here tonight. Item number 3, presentation on the proposal received for the River Life area south of Fulton Street.
So thanks, guys, for calling in. We'll try to log this out, I think. Yeah. Okay. So I'd like to welcome Dave Johnson to the front. So, as you know, the first agenda item is to discuss some of Dave's vision submitted in his proposal that you've received. And as you know, we've invited all the proposers to come tonight and make a short presentation. So we welcome Dave to kind of present this briefly and answer your questions. So feel free to say anything that you'd like on your submission. Yeah, sorry.
You got it there? I guess basically,
Here, can you
talk
stand up microphone?
stand up. I guess basically what I'm looking for, or checking to see if my vision, what I think is going to work is the same as the cities here. I think there's a need for high-end condos down there, and come up with some concepts, some ideas, what I think would work, provided that we have certain requirements, certain issues are addressed, and that boils down to risk assessment, identifying the risk, mitigating them, and then just getting into see if you can make it work from a price standpoint. So I'm not asking anything from the city at this point. It's just so I got to be very, very careful as to what's going to work and seeing what the costs are. And my family and I have done a number of buildings downtown over the years. I've been involved in construction for close to 40 years in my career as banking. So I got a good feel what the risks are and what they are and how to mitigate them. So I guess I'm open up for questions at this point.
Here's a site plan here, and then you've also submitted a rendering.
Correct. And that's all subject to change. It all depends on the cost and whatever. So you have to put something up that's going to be attractive to someone on the high end, yet at the same time it can't be too overly costly where they deem it not a good investment. So we're thinking of the first concept we have is condos anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 square feet there, and we'd have indoor parking. And part of the issues is going to be, security. So the concept would be, have a fenced-in area around there. It wouldn't all the way go to the river, but, probably set back 100 feet or so from the walking path and take it from there.
And obviously the first floor is the parking deck, right? So
Correct.
There's windows.
Correct.
You show like a faux window and then a parking. So there's security in that as well. The units are up above the trail or above the...
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess just a question now, I guess, with regard to security, because obviously the riverfront is an active, walkable space, and we've envisioned it as such. When you talk about fencing, are you looking at something that's more, I'm just trying to envision where you're going with that. Are you looking at something more like, gated type fencing, where you can actually see through? Or are you looking at something where it becomes, a solid structure where people on the path and people on the river can't see it properly?
I think from a cosmetic standpoint, something similar to what Marathon Park has out there, those black rails.
Okay.
So you can see through.
That's kind of what I was understanding you to say, and I just wanted to clarify,
Yeah,
because I think
good
everyone's
question.
view, everyone else's view of your buildings and their view out, I think is a key key attractor. With a rendering like this, would you be looking at condos on 2 or 3 different floors, or would you be looking at condos that have multiple floors within each one?
I think the easiest way just be one condo per floor, per
Okay.
unit. So no multiple.
So not a 2-story condo type
Correct.
situation stacked
Correct.
left to right. Okay.
But everything's subject to chain lease. So, it all
Sure.
depends on we're going to get some input from others, and I got some people that are somewhat interested and see what they're willing to or what they'd like.
Early on when we talked about concepts and goals and visions for this whole area, we wanted to create a sense of community down there. We've talked a lot about mixed use, and we talked about public access and recreation and all sorts of things to give it a sense of community, an organic feel. I'm personally I'm a little edgy about the idea of a fenced-in project, if you will. We haven't really considered that in the past, down in that area, because we've talked about it a lot and want it to have an open feel and a public access feel. I don't know. My front yard at our house doesn't have a fence around it, and I'm still secure. So that's a kind of a concern for me.
Well,
I don't
that's
know,
a non-starter here.
I wonder if anybody that might be interested in buying into a condo down there would think it was a deal breaker if there were not a fence outside. So,
Well, we're selling high-end, units down there, and frankly, we got a problem down there. People living under the bridge on the 400 block on the island out there. No one's going to make that type of investment. I'm looking at this from an investment standpoint. Okay. That's a risk that I feel that we have to mitigate, and if that's a risk that you think it's not there, that's your opinion, then we can just move on. So,
well, that's my opinion.
Yeah.
Anybody else in the committee?
This design is inspiring, though, in that it doesn't include a ton of surface parking. I mean, obviously, there's some for visitors, but that's something that we've tried to closely watch on the riverfront. The fact that this one has underground parking, which is clearly going to elevate their building costs. I mean, we saw that with River Life as well. The water table out there is awfully high. You're right next to the river. So that's, there's some structural adjustments that would need to be made to build underground parking in that area, but it's inspiring to see that they have at least included that in their plan and planned for it versus a high-end building and then a huge, an external garage structure or something else that, takes up valuable real estate. So.
Yeah, so just to clarify too, so it shows level 1 as parking, so it's not so much below grade like River Life with water table questions, but
so it's
rather,
kind of at grade really is.
It's right, at grade.
Okay, I see.
Which also then I think improves, some of the security issues because no one's unit is
right at the ground level. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, but I think, again, I think today is just the kind of presentations of this information. We can continue to discuss it and work with Dave to refine like a very specific plan with all the, kind of specifics written out on it, which then it would come back here and then go to Planning Commission as well.
Yeah. I'd like to see the price points also for the unit sales. I think obviously we just learned from the market study that, either from a condo or rent standpoint, we're missing that high-end market. We've done a lot on the affordable end. We've done a lot now on missing middle, with regard to the blanker townhomes and whatnot, but we're still missing that high end. And even though Riverfront or River Life isn't done and Urban West isn't open yet, we still have, I think, an underserved market there that this could fill. So
I'll have to warn you, even though we define it as high-end, people in Wausau are very thrifty. Just because they got $10 million doesn't mean they're going to pay $250 a square foot, in their minds. So we got it's a
So are you looking at, price point-wise, are you looking at, 200-ish? Or,
I don't even want to venture to guess. I got to do the research yet, Lisa, before.
Okay.
But first of all, I got to get some self-assurance that the fence idea is okay, and there's a lot of risk regarding ownership. You got a huge pile of contaminated dirt that Samuel's plowed up there. There's a lot of things that we got to get squared away. But, the goal would be to get, and we're thinking of a white box concept too, so the person can finish it out the way they want. So if we just have a basic shell, I don't even want to venture to guess what it costs per square foot, but first of all, I got to get some market research done so we know where we got to be to make this work.
It would make sense at those upper price points, though, that you would white box it and let people pick their own
Correct.
colors, because when you get beyond a certain point, people do want it, defined to their individual taste. So I
Right.
think those are discussions that are definitely worth having, going forward, and that if we can, fine tune it a little more and put some numbers to it, it would certainly be worth talking about.
Okay.
Question.
Mr. Gisselman.
What is your relationship with Scheer? Are they just your construction people, or are you in partnership with them, or what is the relationship?
This is the first contractor that I reached out to. Okay, so this, you're going to put this out for a bit, a little bit. I've known Len for a number of years. I have confidence in him and his company. And working with him in the past, they've always come through. So, is it the only one? No, but it definitely is something I'm very comfortable with.
But in the initial renderings and that type of thing, just like you presented today, pretty much at this point in time, not necessarily partners or anything, but
Correct.
pretty much
Correct.
initial contractors who might or might not going to be a part of the project.
Well, the advantage that I have, and like Matt and his group, we're from Wausau, okay? We know what Wausau wants. We got some people from outside, shop in Wausau. Maybe we can gang forces together and come up with better concepts. So I urge you to consider that as well. So to answer your question, Gary, is this the only one? No. It has a good foot in the door because I'm very comfortable with them, but it all boils down to what can they bring it in at, their concept and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Well, we certainly welcome the concept and curious to see what the market bears down there, and
Sure.
talk to you further about your readiness to go ahead and stuff. So that's we're here to make things happen, but not necessarily, as you mentioned earlier, you weren't asking for city participation per se, correct?
No, I'm just
Yeah.
trying to do it on my own. No, but I got to see what their concept is, their projects. If they're going to do condos there too, they got 30% of their costs taken care of. I don't. So then it'd be foolish for me to go forward. So that's a risk I got to mitigate. So
Okay, thank you.
good. Thank you.
All right, number 4, presentations on the proposals received for the River Life Villages Phase 1. Do we have a coin to flip or something?
We flipped it
We flipped
already.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
We did. We flipped it earlier. Staff
I was going to bring a silver dollar and I
verified
forgot.
it. Yeah. And so we'd welcome the ODV Good presentation first. So if you wanted to come up. Yeah, hold on one second. Let me just.
1, 2.
There you
Got
go.
to do that.
Now, here. So, and I'm going to, you've submitted some information as well. This is the presentation, printed copy for the committee to review if they'd like to review it. And we will also incorporate this, the proposal, the presentation information, same with the mall presentation, into the record, into the record now that it's been presented. Also, they have submitted some additional information, which will pass out to the committee, from the questions that we asked them to submit last time. So that information is, feel free to pass that out, and welcome to your team.
Welcome.
Thanks. Go.
Thanks for coming.
Feel free.
Thanks for coming.
Go ahead.
So, Dr. Riveron, as we all know him, Fernando Riveron, he's been with Aspirus for many years, but him and I have been developing and partnering in real estate for over 20 years. And recently, we worked with Bob Odie, a contractor from Wausau, on a Florida project. And Bob came to me and said, we're a perfect fit for this River Life. And so we started to look at it and felt we were a pretty good match. So I'll give it to Fritz here to.
Thanks for this opportunity. As you all know, I'm not a developer, I'm a doctor. But I live here on this side of town, and I've lived here for over 20 years. I love Wausau, and I've watched over the last 20 years a renaissance of sorts in the downtown. I mean, the changes have been dramatic, and you all are responsible for that. I mean, it's the leadership of your leadership and your vision that's done this. Whether it's the new art museum, which is wonderful, or the 400 block, or all the people that suddenly are coming down for concerts and for events here, this is really dramatic for people who live on the east side of town like I do. I also walk on the river and run on the river and ride my bike on the river, and that area is just absolutely beautiful. And what you all have done in the last couple of years has been absolutely dramatic. So when River Life came up, I thought this is a great idea for us in this area. And in particular, as a doctor, I'm telling you, there are no high-end rentals. It's very difficult for physicians or for executives that come into this town to find any rentals that are truly attractive. People come to me all the time looking for advice. Doctors who are, covering or whatever. The game changer, I think, is having Aspirus and the YMCA breathing new life into this area. This project with Aspirus is just a tremendous potential boost for this area. But when you think about the traffic and the potential input of that into the economy, you got to wonder, how attractive that River Life project would be.
You don't have to be close to the mic.
Am I too loud?
You can be that far away.
Okay, sorry. When the project stalled, it was incredibly discouraging for us. The medical community talked about this. So at that point, myself and Mr. Vigut and Mr. Odie, we've been involved in a couple of different projects, and we thought, this is something that we could probably tackle. And to be real frank, I've been here for 20-some years. They have been here for generations. These are people who live. We live here. We raise our children here. We love Wausau. This is a personal thing for us to see that riverfront developed. I wanted to say something corny, like you can breathe new life into River Life, coming from a doctor. But I really think we can do that. We walked that space just this afternoon, and it is a beautiful place. We need to get that project off the ground, and I think we have the wherewithal and the know-how to do this.
So I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Odie. A lot of you aren't familiar with his contracting and construction experience. So, Bob, if you want to tell us a little bit about your
Thanks, everybody. Basically, I was born and raised in Wausau. I'm fourth generation living here. My kids are fifth. So it's all about Wausau for me growing up as a kid. I think it's a great place. I've been traveling, doing construction for over 20-some years at this point, doing mostly commercial, large stuff. Have done very little in the Wausau area. I've used several subs from the Wausau area that do travel and come and do projects with us. But, our thing is doing a lot of multifamily, large hotels, apartment complexes, senior livings, stuff of that nature. Been, like I said, on the road for over 25 years and looking to, got together with Mitch and Mr. Everon and started some other projects like they stated in Florida and stuff. And I said, guys, I'd like to get back to Wausau. That's where my roots are. This is where I come home to when I get time to. I love the area. I'd like to do something to, make it a better place. Part of what I've been doing for the last 25, 30 years is working in communities that, have difficulties or problems or whatever solving. I work with a lot of developers and co-ownership with them of stuff that's similar to this, where there's a problem situation, and I call it an opportunity that we can come in and help and correct and make it a gooder place for the community and better for everybody involved. I think the property they got here, I think there's looking at it, getting together again with our team and saying, listen, I think this thing has got great potential for the Wausau area. Understand, looking at just like even the presentation that we seen earlier, there's very people in Wausau, there's a high demand for high unit apartments, but there's also, like stated, we're very conservative people in Wausau. Just because they're wealthy doesn't mean they're going to spend it on a house. There's a whole different group of people. But we're hoping to bring that product in at an economical price, give them a good quality place to stay, and also expand with the Wausau area. We're also talked about the commercial side of the property, where the pylons and stuff are put together. You know, I think there's great potential if we can get together with the city and some of the staff out there, the leasing management companies, and find out what's available, find out where we can, looking, the redoing the mall stuff, but is there something in the meantime that we can utilize that to expand and get what the original vision is that, and work with the city on that. We know the apartment complex, we know that's going to work. The 52 units isn't a doubt in our mind. We talked to several lenders that we're set up with. That's not an issue. Lending, we've got the construction background, the whereabouts to do it. I think it's a no-brainer for our group to be involved with it. It's excited about being here. Again, we're from the area. We understand. We've got people that live here every day and meet with you people and a lot of your friends and family as well, growing up with them. So we care about the community. We think we can bring this thing in not just a 52-unit project, but work on the commercial aspect, as well as work with the rest of the development down the stream. Just keep going, whatever it takes to help the city expand the area, work together. If it's working with the condos, I've done a ton of projects like that. Some of the projects that, we've done similar to this, I did in East Dundee, a project. We put the road, streets in, the same size building, but we put a bunch of townhomes and condos and stuff together. Took us 11 months from digging the dirt to turn it over. So we've got the means and whereabouts to put it together in an efficient time, fashion, and work together, and we'd be happy to work with any group that we have individually. Our goal is to use the majority of our subs directly from Wausau, many of which we've used in the past. And I guess from that, I don't have a lot more that I can add to it.
Hit it, Christian. Tell us a little bit. This was a property that Bob just built last year that I thought had a lot of potential river life look to it and vision. This was in Aurora, Illinois.
Right. This is a project that I was asked. A developer came to me that I had done some work with in the past, or somebody through, and they said, they had problems. This went through 3 different builders. They couldn't get the economics to work on the project, and the gentleman came to me, and it was started with somebody else similar to this property. They had the first building of 5 started, and it was a nightmare, and I came into the property and dealt with the cities and the architect and everybody else, and everybody thought, here's number 5, number 6 to go down the line. It's, the next one will be coming next week, but we completed the project. We came in and corrected everything. It's a 750,000 square foot property, very similar to what we're proposing here. It's a high-end luxury apartments, park under garage. It's a great place to live, and it's what the millennials are looking forward to go into. It's the senior people looking to get out of their house, moving in, and it's amazing to not only be there, bring it through, but help them rent it up and work with the whole stage of it start to finish. So I'm not just the general contractor that sits behind a desk. I'm not that kind of general contractor. We're hands-on. We self-perform a lot of stuff, but we're in there to deal with the city. I start a project. I deal with it from day one to the end, dealing with the architects of cities. We find opportunities that need to be resolved. We don't come to the architect or the city or somebody with a problem and say, here's what it is. We come with some solutions and say, here's an opportunity we have. Here's a few options that we have. That's what made it successful for me to continue building with a lot of developers that I do, because we work on solving any opportunity that comes out there instead of looking for somebody else to solve it for us.
We want to flip to the next one. This is another one that Bob did locally that I think we're all familiar with.
So Stony Creek Inns. I've built several Stony Creek Inns, have ownership, I should say had ownership in them. It's been passed down to my children. But, we were proud to not only build a lot of Stony Creek Inns, we also we had a little sawmill out, and I don't know if you know me at all, but out in Little Chicago, Highway A. We actually made logs for the log trusses and a lot of the lumber for the slab and interiors and stuff of it. I got together with James Thompson, and we built a handful of the Stony Creek Inns, and it was a wonderful adventure for us. And of course, we have moved on since that point, but going through when the economy went bad and I went through some opportunities in life with a divorce and things of that nature, I stopped in the general contracting for a minute, but came back in and got both feet in going forward. So, again, it's a situation we can jump in and do different avenues and make this thing work. We've got visions, and I think with our team here, I think it's a great fit for our team, and I think it's even a better fit for the Wausau and the surrounding people.
So this video is this picture is a picture of a project that Dr. River and I did about 4 years ago. And this was in Lake City, Minnesota. This was a condo development. And we really like the similarities to this because one of the main features of this condo development, besides the underground parking, was the rooftop deck, which gave a great view of the river. We thought that, architectural design, maybe in the future down here, something like that could be used. But Dr. Riveron and I developed this property out, sold it. It was very successful. It was kind of another distressed property that wasn't finished. We came in and finished it, and this is what the final product was. This is a current product that I'm co-general contracting with Jim Wanzerski. We're building out at Greenwood Hills. It's called the Reserve. It's if you look on the right, that's a 64-unit property. We're doing phase 1 right now, which is about a $5 to $6 million development at Greenwood Hills. It's going to be assisted living, and that's currently where we're at. We're doing 4 phases of it, hopefully, as the market progresses. But we're handling the construction management. Doc Riveron, like I said, again, is a partner and a board member on this. We've done, Fritz and I have done multiple condo projects. We currently own the Rib Mountain Inn. We own commercial property around Wausau. We own the Rib Mountain Inn, which someday I think we're going to turn to condos. The Bella Vista, we worked with Shane Swiderski on the Northern Air project. We were partners in that, and a bunch of other commercial investments through the years. So Dr. Riveron, although him being probably the best heart surgeon ever to come out of Wisconsin, in my opinion, he's also a very valuable partner in real estate and understanding the real estate needs of Wausau, as we were talking about. Our group feels the original development of the riverfront, as we'd said already, has been a good one. We feel we can get this thing done in a real timely fashion. Bob's crews are ready to start. We're financially solid. We can have the initial 52 building get started right away. I don't know, do you want to talk a little bit on your time frame? Or?
Yeah, and like I had stated a little bit earlier, I've been a part of a lot of these projects, and I know it's, and everybody says to us, so how fast can we get it done? And that's why I brought, before, we've done a project from dirt to turn in a very similar project to this in 11 months. But of course, I understand there's a lot of red tape behind this thing with the previous contractors and stuff. I've been involved with a lot of that may not be a 5-minute thing turnaround, but we are butting up against winter. But obviously, I don't know how far you guys, as far as the city and the committee, have gotten into resolving the previous ownership and the liens and stuff against the property and how fast that can happen. But obviously, we don't want to start January 16th. But if there's a way to get started previously and get some work done that we can get it, that we can go through the winter, great. But again, we're looking at from the time we can physically get a control of the property and get going with a clear title to go forward. I mean, obviously, we want to start tomorrow. We have manpower to physically start tomorrow. But, we're working with the city, whatever you guys can help us to get to. Once we can hopefully take possession of the property, we'll work diligently to get it done at that point.
Next one. As we said, our planning on our construction starting immediately. We would envision this initial phase to be done within 12 to 18 months, like again, weather permitting. One thing that we want to talk to the council about, and that is we would like to purchase this property with a deed fee simple with no encumbrance. And in that scenario, you could be able to tax what we purchased right away rather than the leased land option. Bob, maybe you can talk about that a little bit also?
Yeah, I think it makes things a lot simpler. I guess what a lease thing from the city, I know it's not a huge deal maybe from a lot of board members and people looking at it, but as far as a lender capability and working forward, most of the majority of the lenders and again, it's not just a 52 unit, but as we go and expand, lenders tended to look down as far as money lending on a property that you don't own the property. You only own the building, not the property, which does make it a difficult concept to work with. So I know several lenders that we talked with, they looking for the free, simple title if we can get to that part. And I know that's just something we brought up. We're hoping that's something we can do. If it's something you absolutely can't do, we'll go back to the board and we'll make it happen. But we think that's going to be the most efficient way to do it. And we think it's the best for both sides.
We had a few questions for the committee. I don't know if we should, Christian, you want to do that now or move through that? Or
No, it's okay. I mean, well, you could probably just keep going if you, or unless you, wanted to. I guess you could ask them. But.
Yeah, I guess we were, driving down there on this plan, on the original site plan. You have Fulton Street coming directly in, and I don't know what your comments were on that or when that was supposed to be.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So we're working on that. We have plans started, obviously, for the extension of Fulton Street, and we would be able to meet anyone's timeline to finish the road.
So as the building would be completed, this road could be completed.
Mm-hmm.
And then the parking lot for the apartment building, I don't know previously what the committee or you had, if that could be part of a fee simple area, or if that would be a city-maintained thing.
Which parking lot? Sorry,
the parking lot,
mixed-use building?
The parking lot behind the actual unit there. Did you ever have any discussions? Was that ever going to be part of the leased land, or was that going to be?
Just to clarify, which the current apartment
behind the
building.
52-unit apartment building.
So, I mean, we don't. So, what in this plan, which of course is subject to, review or changes. We'll develop a final plan. But in this plan, that's not so much a lot, but a series of perpendicular parallel parking spaces that are part of the roadway construction.
That would be part of the roadway.
Exactly. Yep. And so then the city would own it and maintain it. At least that's what the vision was in this plan.
And it could be assigned to the 52-unit
at
some point.
There could be some dialogue about that. I think the idea was most of the parking for the building would be underneath the building, as part of the plans. But obviously, some guest parking and some other extra parking would then use up some of the street spaces. And we wanted to do that in specific as opposed to having a separate parking lot, but rather use the street to absorb some of the needed parking. Whether those spaces would be, kind of allocated or signed appropriately for residents or something, that's something that we could, we'd work with you on, I suppose, in the final details. But
sure.
I think some of that stuff on our group looking at that is part of the question is the parking out there. The other part was, is there some space other than just a small perimeter around the building, which is kind of, it appears that would be the land tied to that. Is there a spot that we can do like a grill out station for some of the tenants, maybe a little dog walk or some of the other things that a lot of the apartment complexes type draw for people? Is there a possibility to acquire more land than just what's right there for us to
I guess the simple answer is yes, of course, but you'd have to want to present how you would plan that out, how much it would be. Again, I think it would. Most of the committee's considerations will be about how it's privatized or how it's, in the effort of keeping the riverfront as open as possible. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Okay,
thank you.
We can move on to the next. Now, the commercial building, we would also want to have an option on that. We've had issues with this. Verve cuts my hair, so they were one of the people that my hairstylist said, hey, we're moving. We were going to sell our building and move down there. So that kind of presented the way that we would like to move forward with the commercial building too. But we just know that we would have to have leases in place for this to be financially viable. And, with the current status of the building right now, I think we, we are going to have to.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, as I stated before, we're excited to work the commercial piece as well alongside with the residential piece. But I think there we need to lean back on the city and some of the surrounding people to make sure that we have a viable thing. We don't want to be a part of building something and put it up and looking at empty glass windows and say, this is great. We put it up and it financially doesn't work and it's a failure. And, I don't want to be a part of that. Our group doesn't want to be a part of that. So we think that it's got exciting potential. But again, once we can get some help from the rest of the surrounding community to make sure it's successful, we want to build that as efficient as quickly as possible. But I think that's part of it. We're looking at this as a one-piece deal. Even though it's two separate pieces, we'd like to build them simultaneously together and make it work out. But again, I think Mitch's part here is, stating, hey, this may not start at the same time only due to, we need some signed physical leases. We can't put a building up and hope somebody's going to come and move into them, or we'll be sitting there with a bunch of empty spots and then it financially doesn't work and it's a failure for everybody involved. And we don't want to be a part of that, and I know the city doesn't want that to happen either. So we have other options that we can do. I think there's a lot of different things with different type of housing and stuff like that we could work on, and as well as another thing that comes to the city. But I guess our part is we want to make sure everybody knows we're interested in doing the whole thing and be a part of it, not just that we're only looking at the one existing building.
One concern with that other building is say someone built, or if we built that and we did not get the second building, or the committee decided to give it to someone else, if somebody built a lower end apartment or apartment building, it seems like they'd be competing with your current building too. So that was kind of our thinking, that we would prefer to have the option to move forward with the second building also. You could move on.
I got a quick question real quick, and I apologize, Corleen, I'm going to put you on the spot. If I could have you come forward, Corleen O'Malley from Pfefferly. The interest is still there as far as leasing out that commercial space, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I know it's been an interesting summer, so, but still going strong, so to speak.
Yep. Not with Verve, of course,
Right.
but with the other two. I've spoken with them within the last 2 weeks, and they're both on board.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Christian, would you hit the next?
Yeah.
Basically, our vision also, as Fritz pointed out, we want to be Wausau people doing this, and Corleen has put so much work into this, has thousands. I feel bad for her when I met with her the first time. It's like, I don't think we can replace the 2 years of dedication and education she's given us recently about this project, that she knows more about it than anybody. And we definitely will continue working with her and the partner, her company, Pfefferly, with our group. And we've already had those discussions, and I don't know if you have any comments on.
Yeah, no, we're really excited to stay. Of course, you guys know my heart is in this, and I just want to stay involved. And I was talking to Christian about this earlier. While Gorman is also a, excellent company and they have their qualities, I really believe that it's the local Wausau partnership, and it's our community. This is my hometown. My mom and dad were born and raised here, and, we're on 3 generations just with us, too. It's important to us, so I think this is a really good group.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks.
One question. On the second footprint, second building, do you see that as exclusively retail, commercial, or do you see a mix of residential in it, possibly?
It has to be.
I think it's going to be a mix. Obviously, we want to go as much commercial as we can, and as you're aware, the hard part of commercial is when you start going multi-stories up, you start losing the attraction of it. But ideally, if we can get some, small commercial stuff on the first floor and work some office space and some other stuff as we go up, we'd love to keep it without any residential, but I think we're going to end up on the top part of it pulling some residential in. But we want to make sure that the residential and a lot of these things don't interfere with the commercial part of it and operation and that. So, we've got a footprint where the pylons and stuff I'm told are put in. We got to kind of work with what's there, or economically to work what's there. But our envision would to keep as much of it as we can as a commercial aspect of it to draw to that area. But to answer your question is, we do think there's going to be a need of some residential on the upper floors to cap it off.
I think it's impossible right now to project the future vision of this building by the state we're in right now. I think until in the media and everywhere else around town, River Life becomes what we all know it's going to be, I think then we're going to see a bigger commercial impact and more people are going to be jumping on board as we get that 52 unit built and cleaned up. And, you know, I think that's pretty obvious, but I think the commercial interest should return at that point. And if we get the leases and it's financially viable, we're ready to roll.
Yeah, I think, again, what Mitch is saying, I mean, see, that the whole thing about it is you know, we have to make sure, again, it financially works out. It sounds like we've got some tenants. We'll work with that. Obviously, the more we can do with that and work it out. But the big picture is we want to make it so that it's the commercial, what it was originally designed for, because obviously the big thing, that's what Wausau is about. It's not all about building houses and apartment buildings as tight as you can to each other. But these people are going to want to go next door and maybe have a Starbucks or a Dunkin' Donuts or some different thing, and then all little handy stores. You know, that's a lot of these projects we get to, you know, what we find is when you build the apartment complex, you get into a distressed area like this, you start with one thing, and when that apartment complex gets back on track going, the positive vibe starts going the other way, and it works down, then that thing will go, and then the condos or whatever happens to go next to it, it lights up the city and it expands. You know, if we've been a part of projects when you get started and you got a town that's distressed and everybody gets discouraged and you go to these town meetings and they're all like, well, we got to do something. But, you know, it's a lot of money to do something. What is it? Where do we start and where do we stop? But I've noticed in cities that we work with, you go in to do something positive, you know, you get a lot of positive forward things go on. You know, we just finished a little house in Springfield, Illinois. We're doing an Army barracks. I'm a part of an ownership group of it. You know, we went and took one of the barracks, completely gutted it, tore it apart, and did a complete thing as one of 140 that need to be done, just to have the meeting, the city council, and all the local people look at it and say, this is what we want. Before we went there, everybody said, this is a big crack whore neighborhood. We don't want to be a part of this. We want to level the whole thing. We want to just wipe this thing out and make it a bare field. You know, once they seen what we did, they're like, wow, this is awesome. We never thought we could get to this point. This is what we want for our city. This is what we want for our people that live here. You know, that's the kind of stuff that I think when this city gets started putting it on and getting some stuff, you know, I think positive thing creates more positive thing, and I think that's what the city's looking for, and I think it's got nothing to do but positive is getting it started and getting it completed and then keep expanding.
Thank you. Ms. Rasmus.
Thank you. Just a couple questions. Obviously, we assembled the riverfront parcels and, you know, conceptualized this area as an active public space. Talk to us a little bit about your willingness to have the public be, you know, near and close to your development. I mean, that was initially when we considered the project, the public's access to the riverfront, either, you know, alongside of those buildings or in front of them, was important to us to make sure that the parcels that we had assembled using taxpayer dollars, that the rest of the riverfront remained open and available for the public's enjoyment. Do you see, I guess, your vision for the project, knowing that you'd be using the original design, which the city owns, do you foresee that you would have, you know, an opposition or an issue to that still remaining an active public space and, you know, I guess minimizing the restrictions for public access for people to get to that riverfront?
Absolutely no restrictions.
No restrictions,
If
I think
anything,
we're open.
work together.
Yeah,
you know.
I think we're open to, you know, again, and I understand, and you know, other people in the community, and I understand. I got to stress that, you know, positive things create positive things. And what happens is you get an area, and I grew up here as a kid, when you get people you get drugs and stuff that gets into neighborhoods and it starts becoming a bad thing, and we get homeless people sleeping under the thing, and their next thing is to steal for the next meal. They're driven to a point. When you start building that positive environment, and so you're going to force some people out of the area, you're going to create a positive environment. I like to say, I grew up in Wausau. I don't take the keys out of my car. I don't lock my car. I can leave my car in my place in the Wausau surrounding area, and I don't worry about somebody stealing my car. Does that mean it doesn't happen? No. But you have to go in with a positive mental attitude that we're here to help with everybody. And I think as far as utilizing our property as part of this downtown, the more we can help, the better it's going to be. It only helps our development as far as filling it up, keeping it positive people. Them people are going to want to come out and do kayak, and they're going to do the bike, and they're going to do stuff like that. We're going to want to add some bike stuff. You know, there's a lot of great things that we can do this that can tie to not just our thing. And I think there's a lot of the positive things that the city is doing, you know, going north of where our property is right now is huge for this thing, and I think this just fits together. So, to answer your question, we'll have no restrictions to the public as far as utilizing surrounding the building or internally as far as that goes.
Okay, and just a follow-up, you had talked about wanting to acquire the property as an owner versus leasing land beneath it. I'll, I guess, be the first one of us to say that I'm not necessarily opposed to selling off riverfront land for the right project. And, many times as a city, our history has been that we want to maintain at least an element of control for how things develop and how they look. But obviously, once you're at the cusp of a project that, is of this scope, there's not an issue with what it's going to look like, because they're using your design. So, I think that's something that we should have serious conversations about, whether or not we continue to need to be a player in the projects once it takes off. And, if selling off that land becomes necessary, that's certainly a conversation we can have. But my question is with regard to management of the property. Upon completion, would you maintain ownership of the property and manage it, outsource the management? And, how long do you envision as a development team that you would hold on to the property?
Our plan is to hold. We've been a build and hold company, like out at Greenwood Hills, our development now. I mean, we're
So you're remaining involved after completion?
Yeah, we're looking at Pfefferly to, do the management and
and
everything.
And the leasing and whatnot.
But our plan is to build and hold. I live on Franklin Street, 1 block from here. I walk River Life 5 times a week. We look at that. I mean, it would be a great project to have long-term.
It's a long-term investment for us. We know it's not something that you're going to build and turn overnight and just go. And it's it's economical. And I don't want a lot of people thinking just because it's to the point of where it is. I read stuff in the paper. I'm a contractor. I see the $3 million bill that's out there that there's liens and whatever. There's not $3 million worth of work there. I'm not here to tell somebody what is done and what's not done. But the original concept they put together probably got to the reason why they didn't get the finances because they couldn't get the cash flow to work out. They couldn't make the economics work out. Our team is able to do that with the help of the city being able to help us perform where it's at to give us an extra step of going to that. But our intentions is for the 3 of us to maintain and keep ownership in this property. It'll be a long time, and it'll pass on from where it goes from that point. We don't have a desire to take this thing and raise it for 2 years and turn it and sell it and try to make a profit. Our thing is to build something for the city that's great to be a part of, and then hopefully build the commercial part and do the same thing there and work where we can in Wausau. Like I said, I've been on the road for 30 years doing this every day, 7 days a week, and my desire is to come home to be Wausau. My kids are just turned teenagers, and I want to be a little part of their life before they're too old and gone, and I want them to understand that Wausau is a great place to grow up and be.
Okay. Thank you for that. It's important that we have that knowledge as well. I also think that it's important to recognize that while the prior developer could certainly be financially characterized as distressed, that the riverfront area is not distressed per se. The project is stalled, but the area is vibrant, and all of the public amenities that we've installed and are installing really are fueling that area with fresh energy. So, even though projects that you've perhaps taken over in the past that needed to be carried across the finish line, this one is certainly that, and I guess we can characterize the prior partner however we want, but I think that the project, as you mentioned, has a ton of potential, but I think it's anything but distressed. It's just stalled. So thank you for that.
We agree with that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Anything else from the committee? Mr. Gisselman.
Are you the 3 investors, or do you have other partners coming in, or are you pretty much the 3?
Initially, we are the 3 financial investors.
Yeah, we're set, the 3 of us, to do it together. What we have, if this thing expands, it goes with the commercial part and expands, it goes bigger. At that time, we either have other financial partners that are willing to come in and help us do whatever needed to carry it to the end.
But the initial project, the
3 of us would be the right.
Thank you.
Okay, if that's it, well, I just thank you for your coming in and your proposal. We will be discussing it, and I'm sure you'll be hearing back from staff if there's any questions or concerns going forward. So, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Schock.
So, next we welcome Gorman and Company. I'll pass out hard copy to the committee of their proposal. Welcome, Ted. Let's see.
Thanks, Chris.
Go and full screen mode. Very good.
Welcome.
Welcome. I just, are you going to do the slides?
Yeah, I
Okay,
apologize.
great.
Our
You can
clicker
go to the
isn't
next
working,
one.
so just
Sure.
give
Yeah.
me throw something at me and I'll advance it.
Sure. So, Gorman and Company, just to give you a real quick overview, we've been in the town in Wausau for 2 projects. One being Cannonburg Plaza, which we redid. The other one being Riverview Towers, which we both did with the CDA when Ann Worth was here. And all of the promises, I think, that you would see in those projects that we had put in our development agreement, we've abided by. So that's kind of our history. Go ahead, Chris. We financially model all our models. We design our projects. We're fully integrated, so we do all the cost estimating, GC, and architect in-house. I'm your sole source of contact for any issue with the project as a whole. We also property manage everything as well, and we do long-term holds, usually 15, 20 years. There's Cannonburg Plaza. Just keep flipping through there. 106 units affordable, senior project on the north side. Riverview Towers downtown, where we worked with the CDA to revitalize that and kind of extend the life of that building. And keep going. These are the market rate ones. Now, obviously, this is a market rate project, high end. We'd love it in Milwaukee. We've done a lot of market rate projects. This is one of them. In Milwaukee, Alexander Laws, we have the library down below. It's a mixed use. We have a historic market rate apartments above. Go to the next one. 60 units, $13 million in development. Used historic tax credits on that. Frederick Lofts is downtown Milwaukee, where the Pabst redevelopment is, and that's 100 units that we have in downtown Milwaukee. $17 million in development. Lions Ridge and Vale, Colorado. We just completed this, and this is a apartment building market rate in Vail, Colorado, which is actually extremely rare in Vail, Colorado, because there's either real high end or real low end, and this was kind of in the middle that we did with partnership with the county. 114 units, 27 million in development. Parkey's Enterprise Lofts, another market rate product we have in Milwaukee. That's 85 units and 12 million in development. The River Life project, let's just cut to the chase. I think we're talking the exact same thing these guys are. We have the financial wherewithal. We've got the fully integrated team. I'll tell you right now, if you guys have a local group that's willing to put in the equity, we have Gary Gorman that's willing to put in the equity, but he's in Madison. These guys want to build it. They're local. I think with your lesson that you guys just learned with Mike Franz, I think you guys take your local guys and run. It's a great project, but those guys can do it, and I know those guys, and I think you got a great team, and you should take it. We'd love to do the project, but we're not going to change anything that they said. 52 units, commercial building, we'll keep it just the way it is. But, I think it's a great project, and if you have somebody local to do it, you should take it. Cut to the chase. Get your night done early.
That was quite a cut to the chase there. That was something.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a long road to hoe yet, but well, thank you for your candor.
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming. Anything from the committee?
The development should be a rousing success, the way it is.
Well, it's good to hear that from somebody essentially from outside the market.
Yeah, I think your rents are, the reason they didn't have a bank on that deal is because the rents were ridiculous. You got to resize the rents. You might have to do a little tweaking on the design in terms of what works in the marketplace, but it's 90% there and it's bankable. And if the city takes care of the problem, which is underneath the ground in terms of getting out of the ground, it's ready to go.
Very good. Thank you. Committee? Ms. Rasmussen.
Yep, I have just a couple questions. You had talked about also in your experience building and holding on the project. In terms of, now initially, I think it was your initial proposal, had talked about perhaps reimagining the second building if the commercial wasn't viable and maybe going with more residential component than commercial.
Right.
I mean, market-wise, would that still be in your plan, assuming that?
I would do more residential because the only thing I'd want there is like a kayak store or a sports store, high-end maybe restaurant, maybe a cool brew pub if you could get one in there. Those would be like the really only uses I'd want there to kind of complement what the high-end residential would be. And then I would do that on the first floor, and then I would not put office in there. I think that's a mistake, just my personal opinion, and I'd do residential above.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
All righty.
Very good. Mr. Gisselman.
So you speak a little bit to rates. You said that, I think that they were envisioning, what, 1,200, I think was an earlier, that I recall. How are you seeing, this complex?
Well, what they envisioned in what I saw in terms of the runs that were produced by the developer were way over $1,200 for a one-bedroom, and they were way over $1,400 for a two-bedroom. I may have been reading that wrong, but man, when I saw that, those are good rents, I think. Those are good rents. And they're pioneering rents in Wausau, but they're definitely achievable on the lake for me. This is your premier site. And what's great about Wausau is there's enough professionals in the community that that you're gonna absorb that. Even if you did 100 units on this site, you'd absorb that. But some of the rents that were in that performer that I saw, which is why I think there was no bank on this. I mean, with a $2.8 million lien and there's no bank, I'm like, what was that? I don't know what happened there. And that must have meant the bank didn't underwrite it and they didn't appraise it and they didn't go through the whole fiery appraisal thing, which then if you don't have a bank, you can do whatever you want. And I think that's maybe what happened here. I don't know the whole story, but those are the rents that I would opine based on my market research. It would be $1,200 and $1,400 would be like a one bedroom and a two bedroom. If you could do a three bedroom at $1,550 or something, you could probably get away with that as well. Limited number.
But how would you cure that? I mean, how would you come back to that as opposed to what the plans called for?
That's kind of the question. I mean, I figured that I could do $135,000 a unit and get away with my performer with the rents that I want my rents to be, assuming that the city took care of the underground and I got it for $1 and that I was like taking it as it is and going up. Okay, and I think that's doable. But there's maybe some hidden costs in getting that lien off that I didn't know where. That's why I proposed like a 90-day period for me to kind of go through everything and make almost a presentation of final approval to the council or this committee in terms of what the final would be, because it's not enough information to make promises right now. It's a great concept, and I think you just step in the shoes, but there's still, devil's in the details in terms of, coming up here and saying, hey, I don't need a TIF. I just need you to give me the land for $1 and I'm good. It's a great concept, and all the numbers do work, I think, but there's devil's in the details there. So I'm not sure how you turn that around, but I think based on what I did, I think you can make it work.
Okay.
Yes, just a follow-up question. Talk to us a little bit, and I'd ask the others as well, about the idea of public access and active public mobility around the building. Any concerns within your plan?
Essential. And I think, what would be really cool is you have a retail user that would drive that use. That would be really cool.
Okay.
I think the more public, the cooler it is.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Again, so then with the second building, retail, residential, the residential I would trust would mirror the original.
Yep.
The original complex with regard to residential.
You mean like high-end apartments?
Yeah.
Or, yeah. Like it would mirror the demographic you'd be targeting in the 52 unit.
Right.
Is that what you're saying? Yes. Okay. Absolutely. That's what I would do, but you have a lot of potential there. It's a great site. All righty.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Take care.
Okay. Moving right along at quite a clip now. Now, item number 5 was basically item number 4, correct?
Yes.
Item number 6, discussion and possible action on the proposals received for parcel 3 and parcels 3 and 4 on Thomas Street. Mr. Schock.
Great. So as you know, we've had a rolling application open for the remaining remnants on Thomas Street. We've allocated a majority of them to the to the Blenker Townhome project, but there are still some undevelopable fragments which are along the corridor, and so we've received kind of a proposal, based on that. Based on the streamlined process, with the rolling, we just asked for them to, declare what they would use the property for, what they would offer to own the property for, and so Brad and I are here if you have questions on that. We did want to just clarify that the one proposal which seems to allude that they would use it to park separate cars on, that to have, these are not adjacent to the homeowner, so, and you can't have off-site parking, so it's important to just clarify that the use of the parcel would have to probably be open space or yard, that you wouldn't be able to have dedicated parking there, but. So from we can answer any of your questions. From a staff perspective, I think obviously the offer for both parcel 3 and 4, for essentially $500, would be appropriate. It's not a developable parcel, and obviously the homeowner across the street would then be responsible for maintaining that parcel, which is an advantage for the city.
And they do know that includes snow removal?
I don't know if we've clarified that, but we can clarify that with them, yeah.
Okay.
Just a couple questions on the project, or on the parcels. Obviously, with one offer, it looked like being $500, the other one being $50. The one had indicated he wanted it for overflow parking, clearly not an acceptable use. There is concern within that neighborhood about using that for just that. I mean, we've already, we had given in our development of Thomas Street a couple of remnants to adjoining businesses to alleviate some parking issues. That parking is in good repair. It's heavily used. It's taken some cars off the side streets, fine. But an overabundance of that type of use, I guess I'm surprised that the homeowners across the street would be willing to travel across Thomas Street with either a snowblower or a lawnmower to keep these properties up just so they look nice. And I mean, if anything, if an adjacent property owner was going to make an offer on these, you'd think it would be the two immediately next door, not the guy across the street. And so I guess I would need to know a little more. I think we can talk about these in closed session, but developable or not, I guess I have some concerns with maintenance and how that's going to get accomplished. And I think that they may have some ideas for how they want to use the property that are not going to work based on their zoning. So.
Well, they do declare, we can discuss in close as well, but, they say that they would like to keep them maintained as a grassy area. I think, the inquiry that we had from the resident, there's no rule that the only proposal can come from an adjacent or immediately adjacent owner. So I think they were concerned that it would be used for a use, like you say, a more inappropriate use or something, that they wouldn't want to see going on across the street from them. And so they felt like they would take over that, but it would be an interesting or more of a burden for them to maintain it, but that's not necessarily out of the question. But
it absolutely is, and I think the first time that somebody went over there and had to write up either unmowed grass or unshoveled sidewalk, we'd be in a brawl. And so I think we need to talk about, what their expectations are, because they need to clearly understand what comes with the property, and it's a lot of work, and they're not going to get to park there. So, I think we need to be clear. The other thing is that if there's room on that parcel for somebody to put up, in terms of urban planning, put up a garage or a shed that, stuff can be stored in or parked in, if that's going to face the opposite direction and you're going to have the side of a building facing Thomas Street, also not appropriate. So
Yeah, no, you can't put an accessory structure on the lot that without a primary structure. So there wouldn't
Okay.
be. You couldn't. I think that's.
I just want to make sure we have good controls, because even if we deeded over it, it's a lot of work for them and not a whole lot of benefit.
Correct. I think they understand that, or at least we've expressed that. I think they were more worried about what it could be and more concerned about, about that. But we can discuss it further.
Okay,
Sure.
excellent.
Can I make a comment?
Ms. Abbott's, of course.
Welcome back.
Sherry Abbott's, 1201 South 7th Avenue. It used to be the old District 10 council member here. And I worked diligently on Thomas Street. And one of the discussion during this time that we were developing Thomas Street was access for those individuals that are between 12th Avenue and 15th Avenue, and where they would be able to house and have their visitors park their car. They would still, if they would be having visitors, even though I drive down Thomas Street all the time, I don't remember what the signage is there, if they can park on Thomas Street or they can't park on Thomas Street.
There's no parking in town.
And if I remember, we were going to have it no parking because of the flow of the traffic. And so even if they do have visitors, the visitors do have to park on the side streets on the other side of the street, on the south side of the street. So in one version of this, I understand where the neighbors are coming from. And I know that some of them are frustrated that sometimes the city does not go over there and cut the grass, and so they have to look at the long grass for a period of time. I do not remember what it was like this past winter, what the snow shoveling was on that side, and if we were doing it or if somebody else was coming along. I know that some of the other smaller lots that we have on Thomas Street, some individuals were going over there and making sure that there was, the sidewalks were done, because we do have an individual. If you've seen her, she walks all over the whole city of Wausau, and they want to make sure that that sidewalk is accessible to her. So there are some people that are very conscious in that neighborhood to make sure that those sidewalks are cleaned. The other area that I was concerned with, which I have approached you earlier about, was off-street parking in those areas, and you clarified that. But I understand the residents' control and concern that they would like to be able to have some of their areas, especially when they have guests or visitors that are staying, that they have some place to park then on the street and moving the vehicles back and forth all the time. So I do not know if there is any way that we can get, and I think there are, I think there's 7 homes, or am I wrong? Or is there 10 homes? I can't remember now. On that north side, that nobody has access in order if they have visitors, in order to park. So I do not know if we can make like a city lot for them to be able to park there for those residents. I don't know if that is legal. I don't know what the ramification legal aspect of it is. And if we can check into that to see if they cannot own it and have that, if there would be any way that we can make a public lot for them to be able to park there off street, so that when they do have visitors, otherwise they don't have anywhere to park when they have visitors. They either have a small driveway, or they have a driveway that is maybe large enough in order for them to have an RV that they park in there, and then they can't park the van in there. So when they have visitors, then the visitor either has to cross Thomas Street in order to get to those homes, or they have to kind of go around the block and walk a long distance in order to get there. So I understand their concerns. I understand where we stand as a city in order to do it, but I would like to be able to bring both of them forward and see if there'd be any other way that we can resolve some of those issues. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I guess at this point, I would entertain a motion to go to closed session.
I'll read the motion. I'll move that we go into closed session pursuant to Section 19.85, Paragraph 1, Sub E, of the Wisconsin statutes for deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session for the purpose of discussion and possible action on proposals received for parcel 3 and parcels 3 and 4 on Thomas Street, and discussion and possible action on River Life Villages Phase 1 and proposals received for the River Life area.
Thank you. Thank you. Do I have a second? I have a second for Mr. Martins. Roll call vote. Gisselman.
Yes.
Martins.
Yes.
Rasmussen.
Aye.
And aye. We'll go into closed. Thank you. Now, there's no action to be taken with regards to what we discussed in closed session other than to make sure that we inform the full council of where we're at, put together some clarifications, that sort of thing, and educate each other, and continue some contact and discussion with the various proposers on the part of our staff. So that's where we are on the closed session items. Let me fire up my iPad here. So we'll move on. Item number 9, discussion and possible action on the Economic Development Strategic Statement.
So, in the interest of time, maybe we won't go through it this evening, but we will schedule another meeting coming up. I just included it in your pack. 2 years ago, we, adopted the kind of first mission statement of our development department and the ED page for sure. There have been a lot of, achievements made under the strategy, so we'll summarize those maybe at a future meeting. But if you want to look that over and give it thought, we could update this, maybe I think we had kind of talked about updating it annually. We did last year as well, just to review those bullets and make sure they're still relevant for what you expect us to focus on, and or if there's anything that you'd like to add to that going forward. So we'll talk about it again.
Make it shorter.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on, number 10, discussion and possible action on the potential release of an RFP for Parkway 52 design services.
So, yes, if you'll notice, this is the TIF 6 Amendment 3 plan. Within this plan, there is a line that discussed the idea of doing some landscaping improvements for Parkway 52. And as many of you know, the Parkway 52 vision, when implemented, was to, kind of create a landscaped, kind of gateway to the city. Essentially, it's been partially implemented because the section east of the freeway overpass, right, is where the birds are and the other kind of landscape elements are. But the area west has never really been hasn't been improved. It's just basically a grass area. So the TIF 6 plan contemplated improvements in that area, $300,000 or so, for improvements and, in the median for the parkway. And so I think what we were thinking about and strategizing, Marianne and I were strategizing that given the TIF 6's life is closing soon, and there is additional increment that would be available to fund some improvements, and looking at the project plan, that seems an obvious one perhaps if you wanted to entertain that. Questions maybe for Marianne or for me?
I have a couple.
Okay.
Yeah.
First, I think, when we first conceptualized the now infamous Rusty Bird project, not famous in a good way, which is sad because it had some great potential when we talked about it in this committee to start with in terms of creating a gateway concept and welcoming visitors.
Well, still a lot of people do like it.
They do, but it's an either you love or hate type thing, and I think a lot of it's tied to the process that got followed the first time around. It was clearly a testament to everyone's inexperience in projects like that at the time. And, not only was it, over budget, no bids, no water, we had, there was complaints on 100 different fronts. We may never live those guys down, those birds. So, but that said, I think that in terms of community investment, when we expend TID funds for projects like that, even though within the TID there's line items for, landscaping and urban planning and aesthetics. I think that often taxpayers have concerns about investing those funds within a TID, even for, a continuation of such a project, versus, often through Department of Transportation connected to road projects, we receive funding for things called community-sensitive solutions or community-sensitive design. And sometimes on a project where we're doing a partnership like that with DOT, we then can use colored concrete, or we can upgrade some of the amenities and, things like that where it's budgeted right into the road project. But I think if we were to, step out again and begin a, aesthetics project along the 52 Parkway, I just feel like it would not be well received, even if there's funding left in the TID. I just feel like there were so many missteps, and sadly, but there were, and people haven't forgotten that, and we shouldn't really either. I think that, it's too soon if we were ever going to do that. I mean, right now, the remaining piece of that Parkway median is largely weeds. It's trees that are, hit and miss in terms of maturity and, lifespan. And, I think originally we had planned a phase 2 of the birds to the west that we intentionally scuttled after the debacle with phase 1. And I just feel like we shouldn't tread down that path again, at least not now.
Sure, I think, in staff's discussion, I know we weren't necessarily talking about like an extensive public art installation for sure, but we do have, we could help the kind of sad trees by improving landscaping and doing, we could do some landscape architecture just to show here's improvements, and then go ahead and expend that, I think. But yeah, your point, I don't know if Mary Ann wants to say anything to that.
I guess I would say we've all touched an oven or a hot burner once in our lives, and that doesn't mean we never cook again. I think that, I guess I think that the city is trying to be a Class A community, and that is a gateway to the community. It's probably one of our number one areas where private investment has occurred, and we still have vacancies in that area that, we're looking for tenants or developers for. And so I think that, as Chris said, the trees, we have tried to replace the trees because they were planted by the DOT and they were not of quality. And I don't think that the vision was to put in art installations. As Chris said, it was just to dress up the area. If you go to the medical community of Weston, they have really invested in that campus. And again, we weren't thinking anything like that, but we were just trying to improve it somewhat. And it was in the project plan, and so it has the support of the school district and the county and the technical college. And that expenditure period ends May of 2020. So we really have one construction season left.
So one alternative might be that if you wanted to, you could release the RFP, we receive proposals, and we review them. And if none of the proposals seem competitive or seem, not really rooted in reality or something that you would say, then we don't have to act upon any of the proposals. If that's a better option, I don't know.
The one thing I would say in response, and I do like Mary Ann's analogy to touch in the hot oven, because that is true. I mean, as a municipality, good government can learn from mistakes and not make them again. That we've exemplified that. And the other thing I'll say is that in terms of raw management skill within our management team, we do now have, I think, experienced professionals in place that, at least from an engineering standpoint, can manage those projects and, really have a firm grasp on not only project management, but the rules governing projects of that nature. So, I think going forward, the team is in place to do it different and better. But I also think that, we'd have to know a little more about what those projects would look like, and, if we're not going to do public art, then what are we going to do? Because we resorted to public art because nothing else seemed good enough at the time. And we looked at flowers and we looked at trees. Granted, whatever DOT planted out there are rows of trees, 3 in a line close together, not really attractive. So, I completely get that. But, I think that we would really have to, I guess if we wanted to get proposals, which really costs us nothing, I don't see a harm in that, but, I think we'd really have to take stock of, where things went wrong in the past before we would move forward.
Also, if we really take it to heart that we call it the 52 Parkway, then maybe it should have some sense of being a parkway and not simply a thoroughfare to get you to the west side. It does have a certain gateway potential. I would hope our RFPs specifically deal with needs. Maybe we talk about alternative lighting, efficient lighting, downcast lighting, or decorative lighting, or whatever, that sort of thing, and just outline what our needs are and how they might provide solutions.
The thing that we have to take away from it if we're going to write an RFP is that it's a high-volume roadway, no question about that. It's a high-salt environment, so anything we plant, unless it's salt-resistant, its lifespan is not long for this earth. The faster they plow, the more that stuff splashes, and that's where it all lands.
Yep.
That we've had trouble with that. We've had trouble with the trees that are existing in the bird complex. The city forester at one point in public health and safety complained to all of us that, if he had been consulted, that all would have been different. And I thought, oh, well, this is not the time or the place, but okay. So, I think we need to make sure that we really look at what it is we're dealing with, in terms of an environment, because it's not a hospitable environment. And whatever you put up there, if it has to be mowed, like the bird thing, has to be hand mowed because there's boulders in the way. Well, some guy out there or person out there trying to mow with a hand mower in the midst of rush hour, not the best job to have today. So we have to really, I think, in terms of what we would do, really, I guess, overthink it this time. And, separate from that, whatever goes in there can't be a visual distraction either. It has to be safe for the motoring public. It can't be a visual barrier. There's just so many things that we didn't think about with those birds. And I was on the committee when we were first very excited about it, and we were, oh yeah, this is great. Let's vote on it tonight and let's move forward. And before we knew it, we had it. And the renderings that we saw in the committee, the birds were great. They were uplit. Once they went in, all that lighting is washed out by the overhead lighting that you can't get rid of on a parkway. And so, in some cases, some of those elements are complete waste. Field grass is out there. Awesome idea. Once they're tall enough, you can't see it, 18th and Stewart. They have to cut them down so that there's no accidents. We didn't think of those things because as committee members, we didn't know to. But boy, do we know it now. And I think that we need to really proceed with caution.
Would you consider that this RFP, the verbiage be shared with CISM committee, just to kind of cover items like that
before any of it would move forward? I think it should, because there were so many practical concerns that we didn't even get off the ground with when we were excited about the art and the look, and we were so caught up in the look and the fact that we could have it before winter that we missed 20 different benchmarks there that we should have thought of.
Good enough? Mr. Gisselman.
Well, I agree with Lisa. I think we really have to be careful, and I think the RFP can be addressed so that we are very careful of the scale of what we want to be doing, so that, we're not really going, to the full extent that we may want to go for this gateway, but we at least have to be cognizant of what went before, and that we realize what did go before, and we know as we go forward that, we have to be more careful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So yes, you want to release an RFP or not?
I want you to prepare RFP verbiage and submit it to CISM for review.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
If we look at it in both committees before we release it publicly, for proposals, I think that would help.
That's great. Then I'll work on that.
Okay, as we are approaching bedtime for everybody, for one thing, on number 12, I think I'd like to just take care of that in email communications with all 5 committee members.
Yes, okay, we can do that.
And so let's go back to 11 and have a quick update.
Sure, just quickly. So Sherman Street, we are working, that will go, we're working with the applicants, which the committee had, kind of accepted the proposal last time. And we're finalizing the sale price and the layout of those parcels. So they will present to Planning Commission on the 16th, to be sure that the Planning Commission is okay with how it's going to be laid out on the setbacks. And then we'll take both the Planning Commission recommendation and our ED recommendation to council maybe later this month, depending on the timing of it. So that's moving. On Bugby Avenue, we've released that RFP as we discussed last time. It's open now. It will be due in early November. I think November 2nd, and then we will review it in early November if we receive any proposals. Also out now is the Riverfront Concession Building, Market Building RFP. We discussed that last time. It's out now. Ad ran in the paper yesterday, I think, and this is going to be due in the end of November, and we'll review it in early December. So that's going on. On Fix It Up, we just wanted to share, we've had 7 applications to date for the Fix It Up program, which was created, earlier this year. We have a kind of informal staff committee that's been reviewing those applications and working with the applicants to find one that works well. Some of the applicants haven't really been well qualified for Fix It Up, but the positive thing is we've been able to work with some of them to offer other alternative options for our, for financing, because we do have homeowner rehab programs and other programs as well. Maybe it wasn't a great option for Fix It Up, but it was a good option for some of our other programs, more limited in scope. So we will we'll update again when we have a project that can be a start of an official project. So we're working on that. On Live It Up. Did we have that on there too? No, sorry. Okay, no. The Urban Street Bistro, I think we've updated before that there is a signed development agreement, and that we are working with with the developer, with Urban Street Bistro, on kind of the final items of their proposal. We want to be sure before we transfer it that their financing is all kind of finalized and completed. They are working on that, obviously. And we do, we hope that to fit this year. Again, obviously we're running on a timeline to get it closed as soon as possible. They're aware of that as well. Just to obviously reiterate again, they are paying the taxes for this year, so they want to start as fast as possible as well. So. On Timekeeper Distillery, as I think everyone knows, opened officially today. We're proud to see the renovation of the historic depot. The city backed that project with a commercial rehab loan for the renovation work, and that's very positive to see the renovation move forward.
I just want to add to that I'd like to have the city consider working with the owners of Timekeeper to put together a proposal for 60 Minutes.
The television
the
show?
Television show.
Okay.
They occasionally do the then and now type thing. And, back in...
Sure. We'd be glad
back
to
in the
help,
old days, that depot was omnipresent, in TV spots.
Yeah.
And, with the right mix of marketing and outreach, and when the time is right with the owners, so they're ready to withstand the onslaught of interest that might stimulate, I'd like to see the city work with them to put a proposal together.
Yeah, it's
crazy, huh?
Good idea. Okay. Great. On Brownstones, I think many of you know there was open house for the River East Brownstones project, which was very successful. Lots of interest. Their waiting list has been extensive. They have closed on a unit already, which is, so we welcome the owners to that, to the new owners to that project. We assume they will continue to close on units, working off their waiting list as units are finalized. They are offering some specialization, so they're working with those folks to specialize their units before they close. But it's, it is moving. It's moving along. So we have had discussions about obviously phase 2 and phase 3 starts. That's already approved as part of the project and in the development agreement, but it may be moving up because of strong interest. So that's very good news. Atrium Lofts, I think it's just a great another moment to contemplate, a lot of Herculean efforts by many folks to make that project a reality. It's a positive moment to reflect. A lot of people have been very positive on the project, which is great, but, we would note that it did take some efforts to get there. It was 3 RFP cycles to find to get the right developer and the right kind of mix of financing and tools available to, get that project done. So we're glad to see it, and I think everyone appreciates the stamina that, that the city had to see it through to its completion. Had we cut and run earlier, or had we not had the fortitude to move it forward, that would be it would be unfortunate.
Also, it must be said that Metro Plains had grueling efforts throughout this too.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and they continued to have faith in the development in the city. They have done other things in the city, and I think that they also, it was a hard time and a long time for them also. But I think that their interest and their dedication to this project, I think, finally paid off into an incredible facility.
Yes, exactly. Okay, great. And then I pass it over to Brad Sipple to give an update on the Wausau Center Transportation Master Plan, which has been going on with the Tool Design Group.
Yeah, so Tool just finished up a week-long design workshop. This past week they had it set up in the Wausau Center Mall. Culminated in a public presentation to share some of their starter ideas after talking to people that dropped into the workshop and stakeholders, and they thought it went very well. There was good participation, strong participation, a lot of drop-in traffic during the week, and they'll be coming back, working on some of these concepts, coming back in 2 weeks for the week of October 15th through the 19th. This first workshop, they term their discovery workshop, and the second one will be the design workshop, so they'll be coming back with some more refined ideas and kind of engaging with the open workshop format again, and a presentation likely on that Thursday of that week, again, October 15th through the 19th that week there. So that'll be the second week of workshop.
Okay. Thanks, Brett. And so you can see, obviously there's been a conscious effort to have the market study and the redevelopment analysis dovetail with our roadway and transportation analysis. 2 separate plans, but both kind of interlinked, looking at the future of the mall from both inside the block and outside the block. And obviously, as Lisa had pointed out before, there's ownership challenges and other things maybe that, might impact, the redevelopment, timing exactly. Likewise, there's going to be, transportation considerations and funding and other things affecting the other plan. But at least we're setting in motion a long-term vision for both the area around the property and the property itself, which then can be implemented over time. And I think that's our goal, is to, kind of have those visions buttoned up here in the coming months, so that there is a tangible vision for someone to implement over time, whether it's the city or developers or a consortium of thereof. Great. Okay, and then that's it for updates. Anything else? Questions? No.
Mr. Rasmussen.
I have just a quick comment. I think with the design workshops that have been taking place at Wausau Center, one thing that at first I would encourage the public to participate in that process, because I think that a lot of knowledge can be gained by participating. But another interesting thing that I noticed when I was at the mall was that they have constructed a visual display on easels and poster boards outlining the original newspaper media coverage of the mall when it was created. And, now that we're going through, development delays and hurdles on a number of projects and things that, are just any development project experiences, it is interesting to take a step back and rewind 25 years or 30, 35 and see what those staff people, what those council members, what those neighborhoods, residents felt and experienced as they were trying to develop Wausau Center. And Wausau Center didn't come without opposition. It didn't come without mixed emotions. It didn't come without, all of the things that we experience on every development project. And when you go down there and read the news stories that were written, the things that we go through that we just, okay, what next? Those same things happen then too. And so I would encourage the public to not only participate in the process when workshops are open, but go down there and take a look and see what it took to build Wausau Center in the first place, because I think that's important. And just as an update to what you were saying on Timekeeper from a development standpoint, I wanted to communicate that last week Public Health and Safety approved a Class B beer license also for Timekeeper, so they will be able to offer beer in addition to their distilled spirits. So a new offering for them, something that was thought of towards the end of the project, but they'll have more to offer than they originally anticipated.
Okay, I guess item number 13 is discussion.
Lucky number 13.
Yeah, discussing future meeting dates.
So staff might recommend, if everyone's game, to have a meeting October 18th. That's our normal third Thursday meeting that we have usually. If at least everyone here can make it, then we'd have quorum. We would be able to obviously have more information and color on the proposals for River Life and other items as well, probably, by that time. So we think it might be important to have another meeting this month.
Well, I'm amenable to that.
I have a conflict on the 18th that runs from 5 to 6.
Okay, we could
so
start.
if we do a later start, I could do that day. Would be fine.
6:30 start. We can make that.
That we could make, yes.
Okay. Let's just finalize it via email.
Okay, that we will. Yeah, just checking to be sure that was what.
And election day is.
An election day is November 6th. So, in keeping with tradition, we likely will not have a meeting that day, and then we will try to either schedule in November or. And my concern in November is third Thursday is Thanksgiving, we'll have to have some special meetings in November.
What about the week of the 6th, though? Like, is Wednesday?
Something like that.
The third Thursday of November is the 15th.
Oh, sorry. No, you're right.
So you could get in that day.
You could get in that day. Let's maybe tentatively plan for that.
Okay. And we can maybe, if we have anything pressing, we could maybe look at an earlier date.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Okay. Is that it? All right, then I would welcome very much a motion to adjourn.
You're no fun.
Yeah.
This is the fun part.
All right. I'm still waiting. Okay. And a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
He said all these goddamn copies and nobody can. Oh,
No, he did first, so this is second.
I thought I already had one. But this is like a new one.
You did first or second?
To adjourn, you did first, right?
I did first.
Lisa, you did second to adjourn, right?
This is for 2019.
Gary did? Okay.
Good, okay.
That was the
Chris was talking to me.
Well, I guess it's that was approved. That's right.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Okay.
Two quick questions. Any idea then when a decision will be made on River Life villages? They'll take it up on the next